This is a playthrough of La Bataille de Mont by Clash of Arms Games. This is the first edition. They're currently developing a second edition copy of this to use with the second edition of Cavalry and Linie. The first edition, the copy I'm playing through, relies on first edition copies of Linie and Cavalry, and parts of this rely on the rules in those two games. Now, those two early games, Cavalry and Linie, cover the twin battles of the 16th of June 1815, when Napoleon and the Army of the North confronted the Prussian Army of the Lower Rhine over at Linie, while Wellington's Army of the Low Countries confronted Ney's wing of that French army at Cavalry. Cavalry was a bit of a standoff, whilst Napoleon smashed the Prussians at Linie. He sent then Grouchy to pursue the Prussians towards Waterloo. The 17th was relatively quiet as all these forces moved north. On the evening of the 17th of June, Wellington's Army of the Low Countries stopped around this area here, just north of La Belle Alliance, and decided to stand their ground and fight. Meanwhile, way over in the east, the Prussians had halted at Waterloo, and they were prepared to slow down the French right wing's advance. This then is the setting for the fighting over in the west, at what the British refer to as Waterloo, the French refer to as La Bataille de Mont, and the Prussians refer to as La Belle Alliance, named after that little town there. The bulk of the army of the Low Countries, which you can see around here, sets up around Mont in the north, just south of Waterloo, near, of course, La Haye, Sainte, La Haye, Hougoumont, and north of La Belle Alliance, up down here in the south. Most of the French, bar their right wing, set up around this area here. And that's the next step in this setup. Napoleon is driven by this need to destroy the Allied army of the Low Countries before the Allies can be reinforced by the Prussians coming from the east over here. So all these forces will go on the map. Most of the Prussians start off map, and they'll be reinforced according to this schedule later in the day, with the bulk of their reinforcements arriving between 4 and 7 p.m. In the meantime, Wellington's Army of the Low Countries just has to hold on and stop the French from breaking through. Setup is now complete for La Bataille de Mont, and the French are just about ready to launch their assault on those Allied positions. Napoleon, under the blue counter here in the centre, is based around La Belle Alliance. Here's some movement restrictions. He's based in the centre, sort of centre right of the French position. He's set up artillery along this ridge. He has the Erlon's Corps on the right, some heavy cavalry and some light cavalry around to the right here, the guards in reserve. But his plan for this day, the 18th of June, centres around the placement of Ney under this blue counter here. He's set up Ney with Ray and his corps. This will let Ney activate Ray, who can then make a core activation, which will let him bring Jerome's 6th Division, Foy's Division, and Bachelor's Division into command at the same time. Now, the plan here is for all three of these divisions to push and drive on Hougoumont in the centre here. Hougoumont is a massive barrier to Napoleon's advance. You can see it occupying sort of a centre-left position of the battlefield. Any attempt to advance through here is going to receive fire, as they did historically, from these Allied positions in Hougoumont and behind Hougoumont. Any attempt to move around to the left will be fired upon by Hougoumont and those strong Allied positions behind Hougoumont. So, the French are going to do pretty much what they did historically and attack Hougoumont, but they're going to make some slight changes in these plans. Historically, the French launched about 5 or 6, 7 different waves of attacks on Hougoumont. but they were relatively small attacks. What we're going to do here is attack with all 3 of Raye's divisions simultaneously. Jerome and his 6th division is going to move around to the left and protect the left flank. Bachelot is going to move through the paddocks here on this right flank, while Foy pushes up straight through the centre, through the woods here, and will drive, take that centre position in the drive on the chateau itself. The yellow markers represent potential light cavalry activations throughout the French position. The aim here is to secure Hougoumont early in the day. With that secure, this really frees up the French to respond to what has happened. If the Allies are sending reinforcements in, they can respond accordingly. If we shift around, we can see how Wellington has set up the army of the Low Countries, as it did pretty much historically. Wellington's main concern in setting up here, in presenting his forces, was that the French would outflank him on the right. He sent some certainly elite units, but in relatively low numbers, into Hougoumont early in the day. They were reinforced later in the day by these other strong British Guards units in the centre. He has the Brunswickers behind his line here, the Dutch Belgians over on his right, some artillery and some cavalry, some light cavalry in the centre, much more cavalry in the middle here. So his main concern was that the French would outflank him on the right. You can see, just looking over the Allied positions, he has a very strong right flank here, and a relatively weaker left flank. These are Hanoverians and some Nassauers in the centre, with some light cavalry over on the left. Historically, of course, Wellington believed the Prussians would arrive from his left earlier than they did, and he wasn't as concerned about his left flank. There's been some debate about why he sent these Nassauers out, sort of in an exposed position here in front of his line. Certainly he wanted to defend La Haye Sainte, but there's been some speculation that he wanted to punish the Nassauers for their poor performance at Quatre Bras. It's possible also he was trying to bait the French into an attack on his sort of centre rather than on his right, in essence to sort of bring the French around to this position here, which is kind of a nice little defensive position for the Allies. So they're the Allied positions. Wellington is in the centre here. He can go for his ride and activate his brigade commanders. You can see again the light cavalry leaders who could potentially activate, and the corps commanders. I think it's the Prince of Orange, Picton and Hill over on the right. Wellington's plan effectively is to wait and see what the French do, and he'll respond accordingly. His main priority is slowing down the French, slowing them down and giving the Prussians time to arrive from the east, which they'll do in accordance with their reinforcement schedule. The first reinforcements arrive at 1 p.m. and they steadily stream in throughout the afternoon. They will certainly turn the tide as they push from the left. So the Allies just need to hold on until such time. So here's the situation at the end of the first turn. It is just at the end of that 11:20 turn. It's around 11:40 now. Everything has moved. You can see here the French Second Corps under Raye has begun to move towards Hougoumont. Bachelot's division on the right, Foy in the centre, and Jerome on the left. They're pushing up quite rapidly. They have been supported by some heavy cavalry in the rear here and some light cavalry, which will move around and protect their flanks and keep an eye out in this open area here. In the centre here we have the 6th Corps, which has moved up to take the place really vacated by Bachelot's division. They're going to keep an eye on the centre ground here. Historically, these guys were shifted to the southeast in defence of Plassenois, but we're going to try to, in the very least, keep them in the centre here so they can be a bit more flexible in their use. The centre, again, remained pretty quiet. There was a bit of brief movement here, so some heavy cavalry began to shift to the left. The Guards cavalry, light cavalry activated, and they shifted up a bit. And this light cavalry up here, under Jacquinois, activated, and they tried to push forward. And they were countered by some, what are they? Some light dragoons? Yeah. So there's a sort of brief standoff by light cavalry over to the left. The French tried to move in and begin to occupy this area. This is a pretty nice defensive area if the Allied forces can move in. Now, they decided not to. It just stretches their line out too far in this direction. So the French thought they'd move in there and keep an eye in this area with the light cavalry sort of patrolling. But the Allies decided to counter that. And so, as I said, this brief skirmish, brief standoff rather. In response to this French move, as I said, the British Guards decided to try to move towards Hougoumont. So they've started to move up. Not much movement. There's a brief fire exchange here. It's about the only fire exchange that we had in this first turn. The Dutch-Belgians have moved up from their starting position up to here, again just occupying a better position on the right. Hanoverians also moving up. We had some movement here. This was Hill's division activation. He again moved all those men up, again with their view of occupying the space vacated by the Guards. The Brunswickers are trying to shift forward, but they're part of Picton's corps, and he's all the way over here, so he can activate the entire division if he can get onto Olfermans. He's there. So Picton needs to move over here to activate that entire Brunswicker contingent. Some heavy the horse artillery, which started in the centre here, shifted up into the lines. Again, the view here is that, well, they're pretty flexible, but they, for the time being, will keep an eye out in this centre area here, see what happens. We also move some artillery, here it is, begin to shift up towards the Haye Sainte. Otherwise, it was pretty quiet in the centre, mostly just some reshuffling of those positions over in the right in response to that French movement. And there you have the first 20 minutes of the battle. Interesting, both, I guess the French look like they're pushing on their left and on their right, whilst keeping their centre relatively static around here. We shall see how that develops. They're going to have to get their artillery further up onto this hill here if they're going to have any effect. They're too far away where they are at the moment, so we might try to do that in the near future. Here we are at the end of the 1140 turn, the start of the 12 o'clock turn. And the biggest event of that 1140 turn was the French assault on Hougoumont, mainly with the first two assaults of the game as the French advanced into the woods and pushed back some of those British skirmishers. Foy, as I said before, Foy's division driving through the woods here with Bachelot on his right, pushing forward unopposed through the open paddocks, with Jerome Bonaparte on the left. Now they're strongly supported by a number of different light and heavy cavalry units, just watching their left flank there. In the centre, Lebeau's 6th Corps begins to move up, mainly protect their flank, but also just to be in a position to possibly advance through the centre here. I mean, they're relatively weak, 2 divisions, but they thought they'd move forward anyway. And over further to the right, initially the French artillery began to move forward to occupy this position here to fire on the Allied lines, but of course they need to be supported by infantry, so they're moving up in support, and there'll be some cavalry moving up as well. And as that's happening, the French figured, well, we may as well move up and get a bit closer to the front. There's no point hanging all the way back here. So they're certainly going to move up to be in a more threatening position to attack, potentially attack that Allied line. The Allied response has been to really focus on their right flank. They haven't been able to do too much. There's been a bit of manoeuvring in the centre here. At the start of this 12 o'clock turn now, Wellington has taken a ride over to the right here. He's activated, you can see, a number of brigades in this area, some cavalry as well to help out on this right flank. His far right flank is staying pretty static for the time being. He's just going to focus on trying to send reinforcements into Hougoumont to try to slow down that French advance. And of course the Guards leading the way. Wellington has shifted far to the right here, right behind Hougoumont, taking command of the situation here on the right. Over on the left, things remain pretty quiet. Wellington was very angry at the Nassauers being in the wrong position, so he forced them to rush over to where they should have been, over to the left here on his left flank. So they've secured that. Unfortunately, some of the Allied cavalry, some light dragoons, have been harassed by this single artillery piece here. It's already caused 2 hits, so they'll have to pull back. Fortunately, they got a light cavalry activation at the start of this turn, so they'll be pulling back a little bit into some safety. Otherwise, it stays pretty quiet, but you can see the French beginning to move up on this side of the field. This is now the start of the 12 o'clock turn, and of course, the main focus here will be on Hougoumont, and we'll see how the situation develops around this complex. Okay, at the end of the 12 o'clock turn, there are a series of assaults in Hougoumont. That was really the focus of a lot of fighting. We also saw some of the first artillery exchanges throughout the field of battle. At Hougoumont, the French launched their first attack over the walls. It was a standoff. There were no casualties on either side, but just around to the left there, fire exchange disordered. I mean, these Guards units fire hard, and they disordered one of those French units. They did suffer the British did suffer some casualties along the way. There were some casualties here and some further ones over here, but no further progress for the French around this area. The Guards did manage to come forward. They are occupying the woods. The French are over the hedges on the right over here, but in the centre here, Foy's division is pushing very hard through. They routed the Nassauers standing here, so they've almost cleared the area, or surrounded at least a few Nassauer skirmishers, Jaegers, left in those woods, but they can't do much at this stage. The French are pushing hard through there, and in this next turn, Foy will probably push up to the wall as well. So the French really surrounding here. Over to the left, the Royal Horse Artillery is moving around. They want to get onto the heights here. And you can see this elevated terrain here. They would like to be placed somewhere up here to be able to fire on the French on the left-hand side there. Their biggest obstacle in doing so is this French cavalry. At the moment, the light cavalry, there's some heavy cavalry further back, but that light cavalry is doing well to hold the ground there. Now, to help them clear that space, the Allies have pushed forward some of the Dutch Belgians on their right. Just militia, very bravely pushing forward in the face of this light cavalry. But at this stage, the light cavalry could have pressed forward, but they're there more as a deterrent at this stage, keeping an eye on the situation out on the right. So the Dutch Belgians have pushed out forward from the line here. Their original plan was they were going to move around to the right, but now they want that artillery to be able to be placed up here on the high ground, so they're going to push forward again very bravely. Shifting to the left, some further light cavalry push forward, and they inflicted some early casualties as well. So we had the first British gunfire causing some losses on the French. Another important thing here is Picton has come for a walk over to speak to the Brunswickers. A very important meeting taking place here. They can now be activated, and their plan, Picton said, hey guys, can you shift over to the left here? We've got a big French corps advancing, and we need your help over to the left. So the British are feeling pretty comfortable with the forces they have on the right. The Brunswickers will now shift over to the left. This is important because another important meeting took place in La Belle Alliance. D'Erlon met with Napoleon. Napoleon said, go activate your corps. D'Erlon has now moved up, and in this next turn, the 12-20 turn, D'Erlon will be able to activate most of his corps, who are thinking again about pushing forward against that Allied position. At the moment, those Allied defences are looking weak. The Brunswickers will be moving over shortly, but D'Erlon doesn't know that. And they have some good artillery placements here now on that ridge. The 6th Corps is in the centre there, prepared to assist if needed. It is looking good for the French on this right. The Allies Wellington really needs to shift his forces around to respond to what goes on no Prussian reinforcements yet. They'll be coming in about 40 minutes. Okay, this is the situation at the end of the 12-20 turn. A lot of fighting still around Hougoumont. Jerome Bonaparte's 6th Division on the left is engaged in a very heavy fire exchange with the British Guards. They are losing that battle. The French are suffering a lot of casualties. There are now 2 disordered French units in the front lines there, and the British certainly have the upper hand on that flank. In the centre, Foy was fairly successful. Fire exchange in the centre here eliminated a light company, and the assault on the buildings here also was successful and eliminated another British light company. But again, on the right, the British hold the upper hand and they're inflicting some heavy casualties on Bachelet's division on the right. Further to the left, though, the French have brought up a lot of their cavalry, and they are beginning to threaten the Allied right flank. The Dutch Belgians have formed square throughout there. The light cavalry have shifted to the left, heavy cav moving through here, but the Royal Horse Artillery is now in the area, and they are hoping to set up here and begin to get a field of fire along this flat area along here. The Allies are also bringing up some light cav in the area, but they are really no match for what the French have around here. Further to the right of Hougoumont, Lebeau's 6th Corps have also moved up in support. They've set up their guns and they would like to begin firing on the Allied positions over there. And shifting further right again, d'Erlon's 2nd Corps, activated by Napoleon, is beginning to advance. They have limited command, but they are beginning to move towards that eastern side of the Allied line. They're focusing in particular on the Dutch Belgians in the centre there, who they perceive as being relatively weak and vulnerable. So shifting just to the right of Haye, Sainte. In response to these moves, the Brunswickers have begun to shift over to the left. They're moving over towards Haye, Sainte to help out in the defence of this area. The Allies also moved some light cavalry to the left here, and they've begun to set up a series of guns to fire on the French as they advance, and they've already inflicted some casualties on those advanced units of d'Erlon's corps. So there's the situation at the end of the 12-20 turn. D'Erlon about to strike at the left flank of the Allied line, and the fighting continues around Hougoumont with heavy French casualties slowly grinding down the British hold on those positions. Okay, the end of the 12-40 turn, and the French have begun to pull back their flanks around Hougoumont. They're just suffering too many casualties, and they are failing very simple disorder rolls. Morale of 22, morale of 23. There's 4 units that were disordered here, so they've decided to pull back a bit and refocus. Foy continues to push further light company casualties here, which is good, but elsewhere it's just not going very well for the French. Over on the left, again more Dutch Belgians are moving up to confront that cavalry, forming square, which presents a difficult obstacle for that French cavalry, which has now moved right up. Further to the right, it was hard for d'Erlon to push through. This is really difficult terrain to move through. These slopes just make it hard for, well, in some cases infantry, but mainly that artillery to move up. So as the infantry pushes, the artillery lags behind. Some light cavalry there has begun to move through to support that assault again. The focus here is on the Dutch Belgians. The Allied response is to shift around. I mentioned those Dutch Belgians on the right, and the Brunswickers shifting to the left again. Otherwise, just they're kind of bracing themselves for this hit around here. So a few more forces moving to the area. from Picton's reserve corps. But otherwise, it's really just wait and see how they go, if they can withstand that French blow. One other thing is that Ney is beginning to shift to the left. He's with Lebeau at the moment, and he'll be able to activate Lebeau's corps there, which will enable these French to drive through the middle here, and maybe even shift, well, in either direction. They can move to their left and assist with Hougoumont, or they can move to the right and maybe even strike at Haye Sainte. But we have the 1 p.m. turn coming up next, which means the first Prussian reinforcements begin to arrive on this left flank here through the Bois de Paris. And this is why we've been holding the Guards back. We've set the Guards the task of taking on the Prussians. They're not quite prepared to do so yet, but they're moving to the area, and that'll be their task, while the rest of the French divisions take on that Allied army. It's now the end of the 1 p.m. turn, and there were some big developments in the centre here around Haye Sainte. So d'Erlon's corps was moving straight down here. They were facing the Dutch Belgians. They were about to move straight into here, charging the line. At the last minute, they quickly swung towards Haye Sainte, and two of d'Erlon's divisions crashed into those Allied defences around there, causing some heavy casualties and pushing some of those Allied units back away from the buildings. They've moved into the orchard on the right there, and there are more French units coming up. The Brunswickers have moved up to the lines. A bit of a mess of Allied units here, so they're just getting ready to counter, weaving their way through the gaps, such as through here, and the cavalry just behind the lines there, ready to respond again. Picton's in the area. Wellington has moved into the area. So the Allies are here, they're ready, but the French are hitting them pretty hard with those assaults. Over Lebeau's corps is beginning to move up in the centre. Over to the right at Hougoumont, the French had pulled back their flanks. They were suffering too much from the fire from these British Guards. But, and you can see those disordered units there in Jerome's division. But at the same time, whilst pulling back away from the fire, they're launching a series of assaults in the middle there. You can see they had an early activation, which let them move into the gardens of Hougoumont. And you can see there a strong assault on the British Guards caused some heavy casualties and disordered those guards, but they're still defending that area. So it was a good turn for the French around here, apart from the one rout from the sappers. But they were hitting the British pretty hard, and after an hour and a half of being battered by those British Guards, they inflicted some heavy casualties this turn. Further to the right, and we should also say there's a lot of artillery guns being set up throughout the line, and they're starting to inflict some heavy casualties. So Lebeau's leading units here, they suffered from some long-range artillery fire, and some casualties being caused here, whereas the Allies wanted to set their guns up on this ground here. It's the French who have seized the initiative, and those guns are beginning to fire into those, I think they're Hanoverian defenders on the left of that line, and the Dutch Belgians on the right. Now, as I said, Picton has moved over to the left, but we've lost Cole. Cole commands the 6th Infantry Division of this Reserve Corps, but I can't find him. He's there somewhere. I'm thinking he'll be with the 10th British Brigade. He should be, I think, in this area, but he's gone missing. It was one of the command issues that Picton will face. There's so many commanders here. This is Somerset in the middle, Wellington, Picton, the Brunswickers. We'll keep looking for him. He's there somewhere. So that's the situation at the end of the 1 o'clock turn. The French hitting Haye Sainte in a surprise, sort of sudden left swing towards the structure, hitting Hougoumont again with a series of assaults. And again, the Allies not really doing a lot. They're bracing themselves. They've got sort of defence in depth, I guess. sending some of those divisions behind the line ready to respond. They are very much struggling with their light cavalry activation. A lot of the Allied light cavalry commanders have very low melee bonus, which means it's very difficult for them to activate, whereas it's much easier for the French to activate their light cavalry commanders, and they are moving quite freely. Another important development of this turn, as we shift over to the east, is the arrival of von Schwerin and his 6th Hussar Regiments, the first advanced elements of those Prussian reinforcements arriving. And the French are responding by sending, who is this? Subervie, his light cavalry and some guns over to the east. And as I said, the guards are beginning to move up as well. So it's still very much hanging in the balance. Not sure how things will go. The Allied defence is very tough, and the French are taking a long time to grind them down. We'll see how this goes. It's the end of the 1:20 PM turn, and here is the centre for so much of the fighting throughout that turn. The French, de Erlon's corps, moved up and launched a series of 7 assaults throughout this area of the Allied defences around La Haye Sainte. A lot of French forces pushing through. I think we had 2 or 3 divisions hitting the Allied lines this turn. Unfortunately for the French, their attacks didn't go very well. They did manage to inflict some casualties among those British and Nassauer units, but as you can see there, a lot of French units also disordered. And perhaps most importantly, they didn't gain any ground at all. None of their assaults force any routs among the Allies. Nonetheless, de Erlon continues to push forward. More divisions coming up. Still a lot of fresh French units in that area. Unfortunately, there are also a lot of Allied units. The Brunswickers still waiting behind the lines there. Strong line of artillery on the left, and the Dutch Belgians continue to hold the heights on the right. Some good news for the French over to the right here as they are moving forward and getting ready to unlimber their guns. The Allied light cavalry activated and tried to disrupt that artillery. The French light cavalry, who you can see here, countercharged and forced 3 of those Allied light cavalry units to rout. So that has secured French cavalry superiority in this area, allowed the guns to set up to support the infantry. So the French are looking pretty strong on that right-hand side there. Again, with more of de Erlon's men and more artillery still moving up on the right. So you can see the situation here still developing, the French hitting hard through some assaults with more of de Erlon's and even Lebeau's men here in the centre moving up around La Haye Sainte. The other focus of the fighting was around Hougoumont, where the French are now really just grinding the British guards down. They are inflicting some pretty heavy casualties. This time, they've kind of turned the tails through a series of both assaults and some musket fire. They eliminated a guards regiment here just through some lucky fire, and they've caused some heavy losses out on this flank here through some assaults. The guards are now much weaker than they were 2 hours ago. Having said that, so are Foy's men and Wraith Corps more broadly. Jerome is pushing on the left here, shifting further to the left. These Hanoverians, I think, in the centre here have been sort of copying the brunt of this French artillery fire, and that artillery has really caused some heavy losses among those men. Again, there's 1 eliminated regiment there, the others have been reduced a little more. Shifting further left, it's been pretty quiet here, just a standoff, this cavalry against these squares. 1 light cavalry unit tried to test the strength of those Dutch-Belgian squares, and they realised that those Dutch-Belgian squares, even with their poor morale, are still very strong, and the rest of those light cavalry units decided not to join the fighting around there. So it looks like the French will continue around here. They are really beginning to identify weaknesses in that British defence. The problem is the French just have so many extra divisions behind the line. The problem for the Allies is, I guess, Wellington has now shifted over to Haye, Sainte. There he is in the centre there. Further to the right, more Prussians are beginning to arrive. Some Prussian artillery has arrived in the field, and they are now moving west towards the focus of the fighting. And the French, further south here, have allocated the Guards that task of holding off the Prussians, hoping to just delay them enough to break through somewhere around these Allied lines, force a decision here and not have to worry then about the Prussians. D'Erlon's still in strength, and he's hoping that he can make the biggest impact, but Ray's corps is really ground down. They've suffered some heavy losses. It's, as I said, the end of that 1:20 p.m. term. We'll see what happens in this area over the next hour or two as more and more Prussian reinforcements begin to flood in from the east and through the Bois de Paris on the right there. It's the end of that 1:40 p.m. turn, and the French are really continuing to drive hard around La Haye Sainte, hitting the buildings in the orchard very hard, weakening even further those Allied defenders there, and coming very close to securing the area. Again, catching the jump on the Allies, advancing and assaulting before they can respond, particularly over in the right here. Marconet's 3rd Division of D'Erlon's 1st Corps decided to finally charge and assault those Dutch-Belgian defenders, and they had 2 successes there on the left and on the right. Unfortunately, 1 stack of French defenders did rout, but they're beginning to push through and up onto the heights. You can see behind the lines here some of those routed Allied units, including more Allied cavalry, which is really weakening that Allied left flank and giving the French some opportunities over here on their right. So D'Erlon continues to push a lot of French disordered units in the area. I haven't rolled for reorganisation yet, but that'll happen in a moment. But there's still enough here to continue with that drive. And still, of course, again, the French have cavalry superiority in this area. Still another division out on the right here. We'll find out who that is. It's Denet's 4th Division. So they were sort of just holding in this area to protect the right, but they may be able to shift in and help with that attack, which is really going quite well on the Allied eastern flank. Shifting over towards Hougoumont, the French have been more successful. They've eliminated another Guards regiment, and they have heavily reduced those that remain. Lebeau's corps now beginning to help with the attack on the right. They're suffering heavily in that advance, but they're just clearing out the right-hand side there of Hougoumont, which is helping. This is actually Bachelou's division pushing through the paddock and the orchard. This is the orchard here in the middle. Foy didn't activate that turn, so his men didn't do much in the centre. Over to the left, more musket fire exchange is weakening. This is the King's German Legion here, and they have just suffered heavily from mainly from artillery fire. But elsewhere around here, the Allies have just formed square to defend against this strong French cavalry out in this area. The cavalry have been activating a couple of times, looking for opportunities to charge. They've sortied just a few times to try and test those defences, but they just haven't been able to force that breakthrough that they wanted. There hasn't been any decisive action here. Occasionally you get 1 or 2 light cavalry units pushing out, charging. You can see some disordered units here trying to sort of crack a hole there. But Allied cavalry is also beginning to move up in this area. These white tokens represent Wellington's aides-de-camp, who are helping to activate this cavalry and get them to move in and just respond to those French cavalry advances. So the French are doing pretty well around Hougoumont. They're again grinding down those guards, and although it's nearing 2 p.m, it is working. We'll see how they go over the next hour or so. Towards the centre, here's the Allied view from around the Haye Sainte. Still a lot of defenders there behind the lines. We'll see. I mean, the Brunswickers haven't been committed yet. There's a lot of cavalry, Allied cavalry behind the lines. But further to the east, the Prussians are arriving in ever greater numbers. And we'll see what kind of impact they'll have. Maybe over the next couple of turns, they'll begin to respond and threaten the French position. We can see in the centre here, Haye really shifting over towards the guards there to get them to activate and respond to the Prussians. So there's the situation at the end of 1:40 p.m. turn. I should note in the centre here, it's hard to see the casualties, but many of these units are very low. These guys are down to 1 increment. The guards over here are down to 2 and 3 increments. They've lost a lot of their light companies who were sent out as skirmishers. So they are very weak, very reduced. It's just a case of the French needing to continue pushing. I mean, having said that, the French have suffered heavily as well. You can see that sort of these big stacks here are mostly made of counters, indicating the losses among those units. So there you have it. That's the situation right on just before 2 o'clock. Here we are at the end of the 2 p.m. turn, and there was a lot of fighting this turn. Gameplay is really starting to slow down as we have to launch a series of assaults. There's a lot of fire combat throughout, a lot of retreating and disorder, a lot of cavalry charges over on the left. So we'll start over here where both the French light and heavy cavalry finally became involved in large numbers. They began by identifying some disordered Dutch Belgians in that line, really in the centre here, and the light cavalry led the way, testing those Dutch Belgian positions. The British light cavalry in the area responded. These are light dragoons. They responded and I guess played their hand, and then the heavy cavalry came in afterwards and cleaned up the area. They punched a big hole in the centre of the lines there, eliminated a number of those Royal Horse artillery units, which were kind of out in the flank and a bit exposed, particularly after they punched the hole through the Dutch Belgians. So that there was a lot of fighting around here. You can see the gap here between what were once some solid Dutch Belgian squares. The heavy cavalry, the French heavy cavalry, finally making an impact out in this left flank here. And that light cavalry there was a bit too late to respond. They had a late activation in the turn. Shifting further to the right, Jerome's division hit the guards again, and they charged the King's German Legion units along the left here with mixed success. You can see disorder there. One of Jerome's units routed from the far left. The Allies sent in some reinforcements. Just basically what's happening here is Foy is pushing straight through Hougoumont. You can see it's still occupied by these light companies. The British Guards still hold the orchard on the right, but Foy has opened up a small gap and he's pushing in and around the flanks, isolating a lot of those Guards units here and continuing to push through. It's very hard to... There was another assault on the main complex of Hougoumont here. It's very hard to grind it down, so they're just pushing through and into the fields beyond. Helped on the right through Bachelet's division, who is also getting some good success in their assaults. And Lebeau had a bit of difficulty. Lebeau is supporting this right flank here, but you can see this unit here is some of the Allied light cavalry who charged his line. They couldn't stop their pursuit. They did eliminate, I think, they forced the rout of one of Lebeau's units, but they couldn't stop their pursuit, and they found themselves in the middle of all of that artillery. Shifting further to the right, the French have finally secured La Haye Sainte. A series of very good rolls. The Nassauers failed to stand in a number of their rolls, and so you can see the Allies have pulled back to new defensive lines along those heights there. So the French attack here going pretty well, but again, I point out the Allied defences in depth behind that hill. Further to the right, more French success against the Dutch Belgians, in terms of mainly of casualties, causing a lot of casualties along that line. Gaining a little bit of ground, I think, to the left here. And again, more French reinforcements have moved up to the line. Wellington, I'll point this out, he's over here. He keeps shifting left and right, unsure of where to go. The French are hitting both the left and the right sides of his line at the same time, and it's hard for him to coordinate any units. He's sending out some of his aides to camp out here, another one on the left here. He's trying to rush to respond to both these situations as they're developing. And Erlon continuing to push up on the right there. This is really a good opportunity for the French. If they can hit that far eastern side of the Allied line, there might be something happening. Behind the lines, you can see all the Allied routed units. The light cavalry has recovered. And again, more Prussian reinforcements arriving, this time the first of that Prussian infantry out in the far east. What, again, you don't see under all these counters is the heavy casualties that have been sustained in Ray's corps. A lot of these men are very weak. Having said that, because the Guards only start with 5 increments, there are a number of eliminated Guards units. And at the end of this hour, we'll have to check their morale levels, but you can see the gaps that have been created around Hougoumont by the loss of those units. So that's into the turn. Again, it's taking a long time now because of all these assaults. A lot of movement. It's becoming very crammed in just behind La Haye Sainte there. Hard to move these units around. It may be time to do something with these Brunswickers. This is about the 3rd hour of the battle. Okay, this is the situation at the end of the 2:20 p.m. turn. There was another big series of assaults by the French throughout the Allied lines along here around La Haye Sainte. The French have captured La Haye Sainte, and they're now pushing very hard. This is the high ground that the Dutch Belgians had just occupied. You can see there is one weak and disordered unit left. But elsewhere, the French have pushed up onto the heights. They have hit the Hanoverians, who have moved up to fill the gaps. They have begun to push around to the right here, really opening some gaps. The Brunswickers had, von Butler's brigade had an early activation, and they decided to shift around to the left here. It's a good thing they did, because they're going to need to help out on this left side of the Allied line. The Brunswickers may well move their entire contingent out to the left here. So having captured La Haye Sainte, the French begin to focus on this eastern side of the Allied defences, leaving the right-hand side over here alone, largely because of this defensive battery here of artillery and some pretty stubborn defence by British units around here. And the French are doing pretty well. They're recovering from disorder very nicely. They've set up some artillery along here, which is doing well. French light cavalry around this area. This is Jacquinot's 1st Division of Cavalry from de Erlen's corps. They tried to move around here to assist with these assaults. They were countercharged in the progress by this Allied light cavalry. It's fair to say the French got the upper hand there. They were sort of bogged down in this area, but certainly caused some damage amongst that Allied light cavalry and enabled this infantry to advance unopposed. Shifting further right, around Hougoumont, Foy didn't activate. It was Jerome on the right who did much of the fighting, pushing through this area here, eliminating another guards unit and beginning to move up onto the heights around here, forcing some of these light companies that had set up as skirmishers back even further. They failed a few assaults here quite terribly and ended up routing, but clearly you can see they've pushed beyond Hougoumont, leaving just a few of those light companies to defend the walled areas. But certainly not posing much of a threat to Jerome's advance. Not many guards units left. You can see some still in the orchard. Waterloo also activated, but didn't have much success in the area. The guards still hold part of the orchard, but these light companies here don't pose much of a threat to Jerome and Foy moving forward. And further to the right here, it was very quiet. The guards pulled back. The heavy cavalry, French heavy cavalry, pulled back with the light cavalry. They're just going to try and rest and recuperate. Some French light cavalry also moved up into the area, but it was otherwise pretty quiet. Behind the lines, a lot of routed units, Dutch, Belgians, who have not fared well in that fighting east of La Haye Sainte. Now looking further east, you can see a long line of Prussian infantry begin to march towards the fighting. Fortunately, this coming turn, in the 240 turn, the French guards will activate and begin to move up to respond to this threat. There is a big gap here. This is where the Prussians are coming through. They'll march around through here. But the guards can respond to that. There's some French heavy cavalry in the area. And again, these aren't too far from that gap if they need to respond. So the French suddenly beginning to shift things a little in their favour. Casualties are really mounting up for the Allies, and now they are really relying on the Prussians. For a moment there I thought maybe they don't need the Prussians, maybe they can hold off the French and just stem these assaults, but just consistent waves of assaults, and what they're doing over here in Hougoumont, just pushing through and bypassing those light companies, is working slowly, but they're certainly making progress in this area. Alright, so that's the end of the 220 turn. It's the 2:40 PM turn coming up, and then we'll have a casualty check. A lot of these British Guard units are going to be pretty low on morale. Okay, it's the end of the 2:40 PM turn, and compared to the past hour of fighting, this one was a little quieter, as the French around Hougoumont are really become exhausted. It's become a bit messy over there. It's become difficult to activate those divisions. Plus, of course, attention is divided. There's the fighting around Hougoumont, there's the fighting around La Haye Sainte, and of course the guards are now activating in the rear. Other things are happening this turn as well, which is just starving the French of the activations they needed to continue pushing, I guess, in all areas at once. Around La Haye Sainte, the French did launch a series of assaults, focusing in the centre of these lines around the Hanoverians and Dutch Belgians here, but they weren't particularly successful. You can see a number of French disordered units there. They didn't suffer. Basically, there was a series of standoffs, just some mediocre rolling, not necessarily bad rolling, but not good rolling either. So you can see a couple of disordered French units, disordered Hanoverians, but nothing really happening here. And further east, these foot units are doing very well just to hold their ground and keep the French at bay. They've captured La Haye Sainte, but they are struggling to go any further, and this sole remaining in this area Nassau unit is holding very firm in the face of overwhelming French numbers. The Brunswickers, you can see behind the line here, are shifting very nicely to the left, to the east of this Allied line. The problem here is, whilst the French are sort of punching little holes and pushing through, the Brunswickers are just there to confront them as they do so. And behind the line, more Allied cavalry ready to respond. This isn't great terrain for the cavalry, the Allied cavalry, to respond. A lot of steep slopes makes movement very slow and difficult. So I think they'll try, well, they can either stay here and prepare for any French breakthrough, which is looking unlikely, or they may shift around to the left or even around to the right. There's a lot of open ground here. As I said, the Imperial Guard have activated and are beginning to move up. The plan here was to move into this open ground here and serve as a sort of a counter battery to what the Allies have set up here. This artillery, which kind of was just, it wasn't necessarily planned, they just kind of set up here early in the battle, but they've really deterred any French movement here, and any units that do get close suffer some very quick hits. Looking further to the right, some more Allied units beginning to shift to the east just to help out here, because the guards are suffering very heavy casualties. Not many assaults taking place here. There was an assault on Hougoumont, but mostly some heavy Allied casualties were suffered from fire combat against the French. The French had a series of very good fire combat roles here, including another light company casualty in Hougoumont. And further to the right, it's been pretty quiet. The French cavalry has been resting, and you even have this maybe Hanoverians shifting back to the left to keep an eye on this position around here as the French really punch through quite hard. But elsewhere, behind the lines, the Imperial Guard activated as a core activation with the help of Ney, and they are beginning to move up. You can see the French have left, as they've pushed hard against La Haye Sainte and this line here, they have left this gap here. They decide to throw everything at the line, which does open this space here, but the guards are moving down, and they can either move to fill in this gap or shift to confront the Prussians around the Bois de Paris, around this area here. There's also some heavy cavalry behind the lines, so a few options there for the guard as they move forward quite rapidly. Prussians are moving on, and Blücher and von Bülow are now on the field. I've marked Blücher with the red marker and von Bülow in blue. They will now get some activations, and they can begin to, I guess, make some decisions about where they want to go, either to move south and confront the Imperial Guard, or just to push directly into the right and relatively weakly defended flank of that French line. The French have set up that nice artillery battery there. They're not doing much at this stage, and in fact they're in a bit of an exposed position. The French light cavalry may have to move quickly to the right to respond. But it's the end of the 2:40 PM turn, which means a morale check. So I'll bring it down here and we can look at the casualties again. These are units that didn't take part in battle there over at Waterloo. The main concern for the Allied army is heavy casualties among the guards. You can see the Coldstream guards in particular have suffered heavy the life guards. This is all around Hougoumont. A scattering of casualties elsewhere, a couple of Dutch Belgians in there, some artillery, quite a few Allied artillery pieces that got caught out and charged by the French cavalry. Now I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 British losses, which should, I think, put them on level 1. Now that's not a negative morale modifier yet. but a few more losses over the next hour or so will put them onto level 2, which will begin to hurt. In contrast, the French have suffered relatively lightly. This is, I guess, you can see first and second corps here, 1, 2, 3, 4 units have been lost here, and 2 more over in the 6th corps. So that is an overview. The British, I'm pretty sure at level 1, but needing to be very careful, particularly around Hougoumont, as they are suffering heavy casualties. The French are pushing through. They do have more of Raye's men ready to push forward, and that cavalry is now ready to threaten those Allied lines again. Now it's into the 3 o'clock turn, and a much better French turn, bar some setbacks over on the left here. So near Haye Sainte, the Hanoverians around here suddenly turned and shifted and charged, assaulted the flank of those French lines, causing some routs and really damaging French morale. They had pushed up into those heights. You can see they were really about to hit the Brunswickers, and now they've pulled back a little bit. It's just shaken their nerves a little. There was a bit of a cavalry skirmish out on the left here with losses on both sides. Nothing too disastrous. But in the centre here, the French had some good assault rolls, forcing some more routes, and you can see right around here pushing through a little bit, and behind the lines the units are rallying very well, recovering from that disorder. That's going, it's enabling the French to continue with these assaults. Further to the right, Imperial Guard artillery is setting up and shifting to Hougoumont. More guards casualties, again some more light company losses, some shaken nerves in and around Hougoumont. And further to the right, more King's German Legion losses. The French now have a good battery set up on those heights there. They have very brave infantry charges against artillery, has eliminated 2 of the British artillery batteries in the area. You can see behind the lines here, I think these are Hanoverians, and they may be King's German Legion to their left setting up. Yeah, King's German Legion here setting up to prepare for the loss of Hougoumont. That looks like it's going to happen very soon. And further to the right, the cavalry didn't do much at all. So again, very quiet out in that sector. But again, behind the lines in the east, the Prussians and the Imperial Guard are setting up for engagement. The Guard are moving up towards the Prussians. They have the 4th Cavalry Corps in support on their left. That's the French left. Well, really the French centre, the left or western side of the Guard. You can see them moving down north along these parallel roads, moving up towards the Prussians, hoping to not only support this assault on Haye Sainte, but also to, I guess, bring the battle to the Prussians and force them to fight on, I guess, French terms, where the French want to fight, rather than waiting for the Prussians to come to them. Which does leave Napoleon way back here at La Belle Alliance by himself, but he has a good view of what's going on around him. So yeah, mainly, I guess this turn was the French inflicting some heavy casualties. I mean, I just did a casualty take that turn, but these are the new casualties, lost units in that turn there, including some Guards units. Again, mostly Allied units being lost. So that's into the 3 o'clock turn. We'll see what the 3:20 turn brings with a renewed, I guess, series of French assaults. It's now the end of the 3:20 p.m. turn, and this turn saw the first engagement between the French and the Prussians way out here on the eastern flank. Some of the Prussian light cavalry tried to push up and hold some of those key points. You can see on the left there, some of the Prussian Uhlans, they've set up some artillery there, and some light cavalry have just holding that open ground, deterring the French. And they also set up over here. The French heavy cavalry decided they were going to have none of this. They charged and eliminated the artillery, and I think they routed the Prussian cavalry. And the Imperial Guards continue to move north to confront the Prussians again, seizing the initiative, moving into the woods here before the Prussians can do so. Further to the west, another series of French assaults in the centre. Not much actually, just one or two assaults, which didn't have much success. But you can see the French are actually now on that higher ground and forcing the Allies to respond. The Hanoverians have regrouped and reoccupied the heights along there, but it's around this area here in the centre where the French are really threatening the Allied positions. The more French artillery being set up, this battery doing a lot of damage, which is good. More artillery here, causing some losses actually among the... you can just see there, it's superior. This is the guard. I think it's a guard artillery, and they're just superior to that Allied cavalry. Only marginally, but just enough to get a few lucky rolls and cause some damage. More of Lebeau's men continue to suffer. They have really been held in reserve, supporting the French attack, Raye's corps' attack on Hougoumont. But in doing so, they've been forced to sort of occupy, well, haven't been forced to, but they've chosen to occupy this open ground where they've just been cannon fodder for the Allies. At the same time, the Second Corps here have served a similar purpose. They've held the left flank of that Allied defence around Hougoumont, but they have been battered as well by French artillery. You may notice a big gap here. More Guards units eliminated, more King's German Legion units eliminated. A few skirmishers left, but that Allied defensive position that was in around here has pretty much been wiped out. No casualties around Hougoumont this turn, but you can see this whole area. The French have cleared the way for more advances. They'll need to regroup. There's a lot of mess back there, and of course still some light companies in Hougoumont, but their ability to push past is being met with some success. We also saw some cavalry action out here. Of course, I mentioned the King's German Legion units being wiped out. That was partly due to this heavy cavalry charge out on the right. And this heavy cavalry here, these are the cuirassiers, are being sort of shifted from the west to the east. I'll just flip it around so we can see the perspective from the French. So things going well for the French. Just to the left of Hougoumont there. Not many Guards units left defending the Peach Orchard. They're still there, still defending. They haven't activated it. It's just a fire exchange in there. But the French are having the upper hand in that situation. And again, further east, you can see they continue to push against La Haye Sainte and starting to confront the Prussians. So that is the situation. The French are... I mean, they're inflicting more casualties on the Allies. They are just... They need to break through. They need to keep pushing. It's really how many casualties can they inflict before the Prussians can change the tide. Okay, it's now the end of the 3:40 p.m. turn. And you can see here the Guard have really moved up and have set up a pretty good position to hold off the Prussians as they advance. The Prussians have broken out of their columns and are now moving towards those guards with, as you can see again, a long line of reinforcements arriving off from the east. So the guards setting up, preparing to defend, taking quite a forward stance, hoping to be able to resist those Prussians. Around Haye Sainte, again, French launched a series of assaults, having some good successes here. You can see, as I've mentioned, the Brunswickers have shifted to the east, but in doing so, they've now exposed that area behind the Allied lines there, those British foot regiments, and the French are now pushing hard in that area around there. Again, recovering order very nicely, which enables them just to rotate units throughout the front. And a good battery set up to harass those Hanoverians on the ridge. Shifting into this area between Haye Sainte and Hougoumont, British heavy cavalry were activated, and they moved into this little area here earlier. And they launched some charges against the French just in the southwest of Haye Sainte with some good successes. And they're still in that area. And, well, there's only two exhausted, two tired British heavy cavalry units there. There's still these three units in the back here, some light cavalry in the area. And not much French opposition in that area. Lebeau's corps has taken a few losses despite not really getting involved all that heavily, but there's no French cavalry in the area. There's some French light cavalry over there with the artillery and a fair bit over here. But there's an opportunity here for the British Allied heavy cavalry to really cause some damage in this area, which is the French have overlooked. And around Hougoumont, you may recall last turn the French captured this high ground here, and the Allies had pulled back to a new line, leaving the guards out around Hougoumont. But this is Cook's division, launched just two assaults on those forward French units. He eliminated one of the French units, which was already pretty weak, and routed a good stack of three others. So they've cleared the French out of the area, they've re-seized those heights, and if they can seize the initiative, they can move back to that hedgerow, which is a pretty good defensive position. Elsewhere, pretty quiet again on this left flank as the French heavy cavalry rest and try to recover, and they'll probably be straight back at it again once they recover their tiredness. So that's an overview at the end of the 340 turn. Now we do the morale check, and looking down here you can see very heavy Allied casualties throughout that hour. This is the first corps and those guards units, which have been all but wiped out from that fighting around Hougoumont. There is not much left. The scattering of Dutch, Belgian casualties. You can see the French artillery have really been picking off. I think that's the Royal Horse artillery. In contrast, though, French losses have been relatively light, and they've also been scattered throughout the various corps. So 3 losses in First Corps, 2 in Second Corps, and they've lost a few artillery pieces as well. Lebeau has actually suffered. You can see over here, mainly from that Allied artillery battery between Hougoumont and Haye Sainte. I'm just going to count up British losses to see where they're at. Okay, I count 11 British casualties, which is just not enough to put them on that second level of the morale track. Very close to it though, and pretty much guarantee that they'll be down at least to that second level by the end of the next hour if things keep going as they are. So I guess, yeah, the French doing their job. They are causing very heavy casualties amongst the Allied units. I think the French have done well just to rotate the units through the lines, whereas those British lines have been static. And, I mean, the Guards have not moved much. The French have really been able to rotate units through the line and spread those losses out throughout their units. Alright, so it's a 4 o'clock turn coming up. Much more Prussian reinforcements arriving, and we'll see what happens. Alright, this is the situation at the end of the 4 p.m. turn, looking out in the east, where the Prussians have really begun to confront the Imperial Guard. At this stage, just an exchange of fire, some skirmishes out the front, and some artillery exchanges, the French having the upper hand in those brief little fire exchanges. But nothing else happening yet. Just the Prussians getting ready to move up, and the Imperial Guard sort of shifting around to use that space on their right. Now, further to the west, you can see this French light cavalry is beginning to act much more aggressively. They're moving against the Allied light cavalry, which pulled back up onto the high ground, and they're really hoping to exploit basically the overstretched Allied defences. You can see the Brunswickers in the front line. Now, this is the position that was originally held by the Dutch Belgians. When they fell back, the Nassauers moved into their positions. You can see some of those Nassauers remaining. The Nassauers are being forced back, and now the Dutch Belgians are holding off the French attacks. This turn saw a few assaults along the line. This area in particular was very successful for the French. They've now seized this nice little ridge here, and if I just zoom out a little bit, you can see there aren't many Allied defenders behind that area. Still some Brunswickers over here. This is the advanced guard of the Brunswicker contingent, some cavalry, and some recovered units making their way back to the front. What's happening now is the French are really hitting the British units of that reserve corps. They haven't really touched these guys. They've been focusing on the left here, but now they're hitting them, and they're rolling very well in their assaults, causing a lot of damage. Some French cavalry set up here, and he's really hurting that Allied heavy cavalry that exposed themselves. These guys have suffered quite a few losses. And we had another Allied cavalry charge. These guys came out here and attacked some of that exposed French cavalry on the hills just east of Hougoumont. They certainly succeeded, but then Lebeau's corps countered and got some good artillery fire on, again, that exposed cavalry, causing some heavy losses. Then we also saw a rare infantry charge of some exhausted cavalry, which forced that cavalry back, didn't do too much damage. Around Hougoumont, though, another series of strong assaults by the French have seen them capture parts of the orchard, destroyed another guards unit, and those last defenders are really on their last foot, not in very good order. At the start of this turn, I think it's the 3rd Division, the 1st Corps, had an early activation, and they moved up to these hedges. You can see also around here a new Allied defensive line taking advantage of the terrain and the hedges as a defensive barrier. And elsewhere on the right, again, more French artillery fire doing a lot of damage around here. I think this is the remnants of the King's German Legion. King's German Legion, I think there's the light dragoons here, suffering from that French artillery. And of course the Dutch Belgians still standing firm in their squares, but suffering from French artillery. And now the French heavies have rested and recovered and are ready to get back into the action again. So, yes, end of the 4 p.m. turn. The French are optimistic. They're causing very heavy Allied casualties. It's interesting, around this time historically, I think this is where the French launched their cavalry charge, and it's actually the British who have used this open ground to harass, mainly picking off the French artillery in this area. As I said, they mentioned they've opened this bit of a gap in the Allied lines, but their cavalry has shifted around to the left. It was poor timing. Cavalry moved to the east to try and use, I guess, some of this space here to cause some trouble, harass the sort of isolated French Allied light cavalry and the Hanoverians up on the hill. That was their plan. Again, this is very difficult terrain for the cavalry to move through, so they opted to use the open ground to their east. Sure, that's it. More Prussian reinforcements arriving. There's a big line of reinforcements waiting to come on out in the east. So even though we've allocated the Imperial Guard that duty of sort of serving as a reserve, they are going to have their hands full just with the weight of numbers that the Prussians can bring to bear. Again, we'll have to see what happens over the next probably hour or even two by the time all those Prussians come onto the field. All right, this is the situation, the overview at the end of the 4:20 p.m. turn. The biggest news, the defining factor in this turn was the movement of cavalry, which had been sent in all over the field, from the left to the right. Over on the left here, French heavy and light cavalry got involved. There were some very brave charges on the remnants of the King's German Legion there, and no heavy cavalry charges, but they have moved up into a far more aggressive situation, which has forced the Hanoverians in the rear there of the Second Corps to pull back and occupy the woods behind the lines. The Dutch Belgians, you can see there, are beginning to tighten up the line as this French cavalry is shifting to the right to try to put more pressure here on this part of the Allied line. The Dutch Belgians see no more need to occupy this part of the line, so they begin to shift and help out in the fighting around Hougoumont. Around Hougoumont, more French successes. They continue to grind down those guards, light companies. They control most of the orchard, the gardens. There's just that brief holdout in the buildings of Hougoumont. And further right, more cavalry action. The British heavy dragoons, the Life Guard cavalry, the Royal Horse Guard. A series of charges throughout this area, really tearing Lebeau's corps to shreds, eliminating a lot of cavalry. If we look behind the lines, a lot of routed French infantry. These guys are all pretty good strength. They haven't taken much part in fighting. They just couldn't stand up to those heavy cavalry charges, wave after wave. You can see the mess of Allied heavy cavalry in that area. Various stacks have charged, done a lot of damage to Lebeau's 6th Corps, who are just scattered all over the place in that open ground. And of course, backed up by a series of skirmishes and some artillery. A lot of artillery exchange happening over here near Haye, Sainte. The French, because of all this cavalry action, French infantry were relatively quiet that turn. Jerome's 6th Division did begin to advance and launch some assaults over in the left, but because the French activated a number of cavalry, they couldn't afford the command points to activate all their infantry in the centre here. Instead, and you can see there, the difference here is the Brunswickers shifting back again. They've been back and forth all day, shifting back to the left a little further. The Hanoverians moving up now in support in response to the French seizing the high ground up here, forcing some of these foot regiments back. And again, just to the right, much more heavy light cavalry action around here. The Guards light cavalry activating some French lancers, and they are moving rapidly up onto these heights, which are very... there's a few remaining Hanoverians up here, and some Allied light cavalry. And this is again forcing the Allies to move their cavalry around. So the British heavy cav have moved down through here, and the French, rather than responding through here, they're putting pressure on that eastern side of the Allied line. You can also see just to the right there some of that French heavy cavalry moving through in support. So this is all different types of French light and heavy cav putting so much pressure on that side of the Allied lines. Now further right, this is the engagement between the Prussians and the Imperial Guard. Now the Guards have set up in the woods. You can see where they've been placed here, and it is just a wall that the Prussians are afraid to engage with. Prussian morale isn't great, and I'll put it simply, they are no match for this French Imperial Guard. The French have also set up, there's a brief another cavalry skirmish over here. The Prussians tried to upset the French deployment before they could do what they've done here. They did have some success. They eliminated some guns, but then the French responded, and you can see a very strong battery with open ground, and the Prussians very concerned. This is the Prussian 4th Corps. There's more of the 4th Corps arriving, and then behind them, you can see off in the distance there is Perch's 2nd Corps. Now, as I mentioned in the last video, I think that the plan here was for the Prussians to begin to move around behind and threaten the French here, but, well, you can see now this has been occupied by French, masses of French cavalry who may well roll up that Allied army before the Prussians can arrive and do anything and be able to respond. So there's the situation. It's for the end of the 4:20 p.m. turn. The French really driving hard with so much of their cavalry. The infantry now mostly taking a break, and the Allied army really hoping that they can hold on and respond to those French advances. Alright, it's the end of the 4:40 p.m. turn, and once again very heavy cavalry action all across the field. In fact, the French spent all of their activations on cavalry, heavy and cavalry all over the place. Apart from the Imperial Guard Corps activation, there were no other infantry activations among the French. Over on the left here, there's a shifting to the east of all of these forces. The Dutch Belgians continue to try to move their way to the east, but the French heavies in the centre there have begun to punch their way through and threaten the flanks of that 1st Corps line around Hougoumont. Again, no infantry activations here. This is just the cavalry doing all the work in and around here. Light cavalry charges, heavy cavalry charges. A lot of the cavalry, the heavies, are still available. They've moved up and these two in the middle there haven't charged yet. They're available to charge again next turn, possibly. The Allied cavalry in the centre here didn't activate, so things were pretty quiet around the centre here. None of Lebeau's routed men rallied, so they looked to be way out of the fight at this stage. This 6th Corps has just been a disaster from the start, suffering from light cavalry charges early, this artillery response, and then the heavies without really doing much. You may recall very early on in the day their role was just to occupy this centre ground here, which they did, and they stood and just have been hit by wave after wave of Allied assaults. Now, around Haye, Sainte, the Allies have just rearranged their defences a little bit. Brunswickers are now moving up into the line in the centre. Some more stragglers are returning to the field. You can see some Nassauers in the centre there. A few French units were eliminated in their fighting against these foot regiments, British foot regiments out in the west. The British lost some artillery pieces, but this is where a lot of the action was this turn, out on this eastern side of the Allied line defending that hill. This was massive cavalry action out here. They forced much of the British force, the Allied forces, Nassauers mainly in this area, off the heights. There are a few remaining, you can see, but this is a combination of the Guard light cavalry, French cuirassiers, heavy cavalry, and some lancers, all working together through various activations to just destroy that eastern side of the Allied line. Allied light cavalry is also activating and trying to respond, but actually there's still some Allied heavy cavalry behind the lines. It's just going to be difficult to activate them. They're there, you can see them waiting behind, but in the meantime their frontline infantry is being rolled up and destroyed. You can see behind the lines there some previously routed Prussian cavalry coming in to help as well. But things looking good for the French over here. The assaults didn't quite go as well as they would have hoped, but you can see not all of a small number of these cavalry units have charged, and there are still a lot to help in the following turn. Some more light skirmishing over here between the Guard and the Prussians. The French guns getting to action out on the right there and really hurting the Prussian cavalry, scaring them away from that right flank. I think the Prussians caused one hit amongst the French Guard out on the left there, and in response they've suffered some very heavy casualties before even getting too close to the French. The Prussians, again, their morale is very low. They don't hit very hard. I think they have a fire attack value of 5 on the reverse side of their counter. It's difficult for them to get into line formation. They prefer columns, and they just don't have the hitting power to do much against these well-defended Imperial Guard units. Again, looking behind the line, this is more a 4th Corps arriving behind Blucher there, and Purchase 2nd Corps still very slowly making their way on to the field of battle. Now, of course, it's the end of the hour, so I'm going to do a morale check just now. Alright, so here's the order of battle, and you can see those very heavy Guards losses amongst the British there. A scattering of losses around elsewhere as well. The Dutch Belgians, some 2nd Corps losses. King's German Legion have lost heavily as well in both 1st Corps and 2nd Corps. You can see up here and over here. And in contrast, you can see Lebeau's 6th Corps has suffered heavily, their artillery in particular, but otherwise the French are doing pretty well. Now this brings the total British losses to 12 amongst the guards and some foot units over in the reserve corps. And that brings them to morale level 12, which will give them a negative morale modifier on all of their rolls. That isn't too much of a concern in itself. The main concern here is that 6 more British losses will bring them to level 3. And if that happens, all the Dutch and Belgian allies immediately rout. Now, having said that, the remaining British units are looking pretty well. The problem here with, I guess, the 3rd Division of the 1st Corps, they may need to pull back, but these foot units from the 5th and the 6th Division of the Reserve Corps are very strong and doing very well. I think the key is going to be what the Allies do, how they respond to this. They do have some cavalry behind the lines here. They're going to have to activate those and send them in to stop the French. So it's, as I said, end of the 4:40 p.m. turn, right at the start of the 5 p.m. turn, and this is really coming to a close. Well, coming to, I guess, the pointy end of the battle. Things are really happening around this end of the line. Losses are piling up. The guards are pretty happy where they are. The Prussians are scared. And we'll see what happens over the next hour or so. Alright, we're at the end of the 5 o'clock turn. I haven't done the fire phase or the assault phase yet. There's a lot to get through, so I'll do those in a moment. But I just want to report on the situation before that happens. Now, von Bülow's 4th Corps has been facing off against the Imperial Guard and suffering quite heavily from that mainly artillery fire, causing just the 1 Imperial Guard casualty on the right side of that line. But because of the sort of dire situation unfolding on the left flank of the Allied line around here, half of von Bülow's corps is now diverting. They've decided not to wait for Perch's corps. You can see Perch isn't too far behind on this road here. But this situation here is deteriorating very quickly for the Allies. French heavy cavalry are hitting very hard. A lot of French light cavalry hitting. I mean, the French didn't get a lot of light cavalry activations this turn. They failed a lot of their rolls, but it was enough for the heavies to do some damage out here on the left. And the light cavalry just can't face up against those heavies. We now have some Allied, I think they're dragoons, heavy dragoons, moving up into the area, some cuirassiers. The Brunswickers have now shifted again. They've been all over the place. They're shifting back over to the left here. But you can see a series of assaults about to take place on some already disordered Hanoverians. Over on the right, the Hanoverians have countercharged. They're going to try and put some pressure. You can see a series of French disordered units out on the right. In the very least, try and regain some of that ridge, the Waterloo Ridge. In this artillery exchange to the right, the French are certainly getting the upper hand. You can see this big gap here left where they've eliminated some of that Allied artillery. And in the centre where this Allied heavy cavalry was, these are the heavy dragoons. They've come around and they're going to shift. So there is a potential confrontation going to take place between these Allied heavies and the French heavies, cuirassiers in this area who, again, I mentioned last turn, they still had a few activations. A few of the units were fresh and they really cleared out. You can see a couple of the Allied forces form square. The infantry working well with the heavies. The heavies force the infantry in the square and then the French infantry are charging those Allied squares. Now, the Allies did activate this 3rd Division for activation, but they were the second last counter drawn, and so they didn't get a chance to do anything before they were charged on all sides. It's very messy around here, as you can see. You can see the assault markers that I've marked. The numbers on top indicate how far they've charged. So a few short-range charges here, some long-range charges in this area. This is Bonaparte's division swinging around and hitting these guards in the rear, whilst Bataille shifts around to the left and is beginning to clear out these skirmishes on the left, while Foy remains in the centre here. He didn't activate this turn. So both French cavalry and infantry activating this turn and working together very nicely. You can see they've left this big space here where the French artillery is still causing some damage on those Dutch Belgians and eliminating more of the Royal Horse artillery. So that is the situation. It's the end of the 5 o'clock turn. As I said, a lot of assaults happening over here, which will change that situation. And some more assaults in the centre. I suspect the French will have the upper hand in these assaults and clear the way forward for that guard light cavalry in this area to begin to push through against the Brunswickers. But once again, a lot of cuirassiers ready to hit hard. All right, I'm just at the end of the 5:20 p.m. turn, and I think the writing may be on the wall for the Allied army of the Low Countries. The French continue to very effectively combine their infantry and cavalry on both flanks of the Allied line, just to continue to force back and harass and destroy so many Allied units. You can see behind the lines here a number of routed units. Stragglers, they're recovering from their rout pretty well, but stragglers slowly making their way up. There's a lot of command confusion among the Allies, particularly on the right-hand side, which I'll show you in a moment. Out on the left in this turn, the heavies once again got involved. You can see their exhausted and charged markers. The Brunswickers were forced into square by the Guard light cavalry. This is d'Erlon's corps launched another series of assaults, so again the infantry getting involved. Unfortunately, they activated early before the Guard cavalry, so they didn't get a chance to charge those Brunswickers in the centre. But elsewhere, the French doing a lot of damage. You can see forcing in the light cavalry. The Allied light cavalry are just retreating in the face of that heavy French cavalry. The cuirassiers out on the left. In the centre, you can see the French Guards artillery have just punched a big hole along this ridge here, and out towards the west, Ray's corps. They all activated Foy, Bachelot, and Bonaparte. You can see now they've cleared out during the fire phase, some very good rolling, cleared out the last defenders of Hougoumont, and just one Guards unit left in I think they're in the orchard, just on the edge of the orchard there, but very weak. And this 3rd division here of the 1st Corps is surrounded. 2 of them are disordered, not much left there. And around the edges, Bonaparte and Bachelot's men continue to push forward with the help of that 3rd Cavalry Corps. And the French just not being able to put much of a fight. You can see a lot of disordered units there. Behind the lines, the Hanoverians have shifted out of the woods just behind the lines here to help out and stem the tide, and the Dutch Belgians are starting to rush out to their aid, leaving the right side of that flank unoccupied. Bar that those light dragoons out there. So that is the situation at the end of 5:20. As I said, British morale is now on to level 2. They get a -3 modifier. Lebeau's corps, I mentioned briefly earlier, are down to level 3. They have a -12 modifier, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what happens here with Lebeau. The Allies aren't even activating their cavalry in that area. There's just no point to it anymore. They need to watch what's happening elsewhere. The Prussians didn't do much that turn, bar suffer some more very heavy casualties to this French artillery. I mean, you have all these Prussian guns grouping together to fire on a single target, and they roll low time and time again. Luck just seems to be against the Prussians. They did disorder one of those French units out on the right of the line there. But in exchange, these Prussians are suffering heavy casualties below those stacks there. Some Dutch, Belgian, Nassau, I think artillery was eliminated in this area. French artillery just has the upper hand. Wherever there's a artillery exchange, the French are winning it. Now the Prussians, you can see here, this is still part of 4th Corps on the left. They are preparing to strike against this part of the French line. And the heavies just were unfazed by this. They even considered countercharging the Prussians, but they thought they may as well continue in rolling up that left flank of the Allied line. I guess the good news for the Allies is they haven't suffered many more British casualties. Their centre still holds very firm. There's foot units there doing very well. There was one Guards unit eliminated that turn, but otherwise there shouldn't be too much deterioration of Allied morale at the end of this coming 540 turn. I've just started to set up the activation markers for the 540 turn, and we'll report on that soon. Okay, it's the end of the 5:40 p.m. turn, and another series of crushing blows by the French on that Allied line. We'll start here around Hougoumont, where you can see they've now cleared out the orchard. There's only 2 disordered British units there and a light company, and the heavies are pretty fresh. A lot of the infantry did the work there. Again, Bonaparte, Bachelot, Foy, coordinating their attacks to clear out the Allied defenders from that area. And they're still, these guys have been fighting. The French have been fighting this area now for 6 hours, but they're still in relatively good health. It's been a slow grind, but they haven't suffered many losses along the way. Some of these battalions are still full strength, haven't suffered much at all. Behind the lines you can see there the Allied Hanoverians and the Dutch Belgians are continuing to shift over. Basically they're just trying to stop this French advance. Of course next turn it'll be the 6 p.m. turn, and those heavy, the French cuirassiers will again be in action, activating and hitting hard. So the Allies are in a lot of trouble here. And you can see all those routed units behind the line. Nothing, again, very quiet in the centre here. Over here, it was fairly quiet in the centre here. Over on the right, again, a lot of cavalry action. This time, again, the heavies combining with the various light infantry. The order of activations here was very critical. The British heavies did activate, and they tried to charge the French light cavalry. They had some success, but they ended up exhausted. And so when the French heavy cavalry activated, they replied and very quickly cleared out just about all of the Allied cavalry in the area. And again, some routed units behind the line there. Now Wellington is in this area. You can see him here. He's taking close control of the situation, trying to activate as many units as possible. But you can see here, these are French, I think, cuirassiers. They've been disordered after a charge, but they're right in there. In fact, there are some light under that tide marker there. There's some guard light cavalry units. They're really pushing through. Brunswickers have formed a strong square there. And I guess the problem for the cavalry here, it looks like there's a lot of French infantry behind the line to Erlon's corps, but these are very weak. A lot of these units are down to 1 or 2 increments. And they can't really push up much at all. This all sounds very fine for the French. They're doing very well, but here come the Prussians. They are just sitting there and, well, they're not sitting there, they've been advancing, and I think whoever gets the first activation next turn could really shape what happens out here on the right. If the Prussians can activate first, I think they can cause some problems for that French cavalry out on the right. The French don't have much in this area. The guards could have, of course, shift to their left. In fact, the Prussians, although they've been, sorry for the camera, suffering heavily, they did manage to inflict a casualty on the French here, destroyed a battalion. But otherwise, on the right, that artillery again is just doing so much damage to the Prussians. And Purchase Corps now has arrived. He's just behind Blucher there. Now that's the situation, that's the overview at the end of the 5:40 p.m. turn. It is just on 6 p.m. And of course this means we do a morale check. And I'll just show you the morale board. So again, more guards losses. This past hour there's been, because of all this cavalry action, a lot of cavalry casualties. In that last 20-minute section there was a lot of heavy cavalry casualties, a lot of automatic routes, the units routing off the board. Now, I count 15 British losses, which puts them one loss below level 3. So they're still on level 2. That's not counting the King's German Legion. I don't know if the King's German Legion should be British. If they are, there are at least 3 King's German Legions. That means that the British are on level 3 and all their allies will rout. I need to check that because, well, that's going to determine what happens in along this entire ridge. If the King's German Legion units count towards British losses on the morale track, it's going to be disastrous for that army of the Low Countries. Elsewhere, the French are starting to rack up some losses again. You can see Lebeau's corps has suffered heavily. First Corps has suffered 6 losses, but Second Corps only 5. But again, most of the remaining units on the field very low, down to 1 or 2 increments. So they're really spent as a force. With First Corps still doing very strong. All right, so that's the order of battle at the end of the 5:40 p.m. turn, and I will check what happens with those King's German Legion units. All right, this is the end of the 6 p.m. turn, and just to update on the 5:40 p.m. turn, the King's German Legion haven't been counted in the British, so the British are still on morale level 2, the Allies are still on the field, the fight continues, and the Prussians have had their opportunity to hit the French. Unfortunately for the Prussians, there were some French activations early. Some French light cavalry, I think it was these guys here, they activated, sortied out here, harassed the Prussian lines. You can see some squares being formed, all of this which slowed the Prussians down. Shortly thereafter, the Imperial Guard, just these guys here, this is the Young Guard, activated and shifted their line out to the right out here. And some of d'Erlon's corps activated and they shifted their line out. This leaves a bit of a gap into d'Erlon's line, but there's a strong French battery behind the lines there. The Brunswickers are really in no position to advance. And this all happened, and then the Prussians had some of the last activations for the turn, so they couldn't really do much in terms of pushing forward. Purchase Corps, and this is still part of 4th Corps around here, under von Bülow. Purchase 2nd Corps, they're trying to squeeze their way right in between the two halves of, you see 4th Corps here, 4th Corps here, and this is Purchase Corps trying to squeeze their way in the middle without much success. They're really hoping von Bülow can move up and get out of the way so they can follow up behind. There was some Guard light cavalry activity. You can see these are actually Guards units behind the Brunswickers. They have shifted around behind the lines, really harassing. This is, you can see the heavies here, they'll activate next turn. They didn't do much this turn. Over to the right, this is the 5th Division of Picton's Corps, who have shifted from around the Haye Sainte down behind the lines. They're trying to, again, stem this tide as the French slowly roll up that Allied line. So again, these are French guard light cavalry units. The Allies have lost a lot of their cavalry, including their heavy cavalry, in this area, and it's up to the 5th Division to respond and stop that cavalry pushing further. It'll be at least a turn before they can do so. The heavies are going to be active next turn. As I mentioned last turn, although the heavies are really clearing out a lot of this area, they can't do much against these Brunswickers. They can try and charge them, although they're in some pretty solid squares there. This de Erlon's corps is really spent. These men are very weak. I should also point out that I think the 5th Division is also very weak. They've been around Haye, saying they're potting away at the French, but along the way they have suffered some heavy casualties. Now, over to the right, you can see Hougoumont has been entirely cleared out. Another effective, not only Hougoumont, but behind the lines here, you may recall there were some guards, battalions here, they've been destroyed entirely by an effective combination of infantry and cavalry. Now, you can see Jerome's 6th Division here, they're reforming. They are pretty strong. I think this is Bachelet's men here, they're prepared. But in response, you can see, first of all, we have the Hanoverians lined up of the 2nd Corps, and behind them the Dutch-Belgian division of the 1st Corps. And Wellington has also recalled his heavies in this area. You can see they pulled away from Lebeau's corps. There was no point. Yes, they were doing some damage, but their lines were in danger. So that heavy cavalry, this is the light guard, cavalry, a few others, very heavy cavalry, they're pulling back. And you can see the French taking advantage of this space. There is one allied, Dutch-Belgian, I think, light cavalry division out here, but you have some heavies moving through. The French light cavalry here, more French, I think, heavy cavalry up the back there, not many left, with some stragglers and some remnants of some squares left behind. There were a lot of Allied units that routed off the map that turn, including some Guards divisions. So this, I'm pretty confident, will be, in addition to those Guards units that were lost, this will be there'll be 2 more turns left. This is the 6:20 PM turn coming up, and then the 6:40 turn, and then there won't be much left of, or certainly of that Allied right flank. The entire Allied line, pretty much. There isn't much left. Alright, so that's the end of the 6 PM turn. The battle continues, the Prussians hoping to, again, do something. Alright, this is the end of the 6:20 PM turn. And there have been some pretty important developments, a lot of assaults throughout the lines this turn. There were a pretty intense series of assaults and counter-assaults. You can see the Prussians out on the left there. The French artillery still doing a lot of damage out this far left of the Prussian line, but the Prussians decided it was do or die, so they've charged the French on the left there. The Guards shifted to the right, and the Prussians thought they'd start to test those French defences. There was a charge there, there were some more charges around here. Generally not much success for the Prussians. They had, you can see here, pretty strong numbers. They just consistently rolled very poorly on the assault roll. In most cases they actually rolled to close. You can see some of the French there disordered. They just consistently rolled poorly on their assault rolls. The same along here. They all, most of them rolled to close very successfully at a distance of usually 3 or 4. But they just could not roll well, basically, on that final roll. And in a few locations, the French counter-assaulted. So I think here there was a French counter-assault on 2 Silesian units, which both routed. Elsewhere, though, the Prussians really hitting the French. Around here to Erlen's Corps, starting to be hit by the Prussians. This is important because around the right here, behind the Brunswickers, the 5th Division of the Reserve Corps, these are the British units here, they've formed square to contain, in a way, that guard-like cavalry that had been roaming behind the lines or about to roam. So they've kind of, you can see this sort of little containment line that they've formed of squares, which has really deterred that light cavalry. The heavies, they were active again, but they were pretty ineffectual this turn. I think they tried to charge the remaining Allied cavalry unit up on the heights there, and it didn't go too well. Yeah, it's all pretty quiet around the centre there, and you can see the Allied heavies beginning to shift out to the left. They're kind of abandoning this right-hand side position, and I'm moving up to the left side of the field. Over on the right, unfortunately, the Dutch Belgians had an early activation, so they've just shifted a little bit further to the right, to the left, sorry. The Hanoverians in line, and Ray's corps beginning to form up. So Foy has shifted around behind Bachelot, forming up on the left, Bachelot in the centre, Jerome's 6th Division on the right. And this is French heavy cavalry shifting around and getting ready to cause some damage here. So the French getting ready, they're just composing themselves and getting ready for a renewed assault on this reformed Allied position out here, just north of Hougoumont. So that's it, that's the end of the 6:20 p.m. turn. This is really where I think the battle will be, well, Allied morale. There have been, I should say, a few guards losses. A few of those guards units that routed left the board, and I think there were also a few more sort of straggling casualties over on the right. Right, it's the end of the 6:40 p.m. turn, and a lot happening this turn. Over on the left, you can see in the distance some of the guards begin to shift around to the right. They're leaving their artillery there. They're doing very well, just scaring the Prussians away from this area. And so a lot of these guards battalions are shifting over to this area. This is where the Prussians are beginning to push through. They're launching a wave of assaults along the lines around here, and whilst again their assault rolls are going terribly, they are managing to pick their way through the gaps between really the guards and Ray's D'Erlen's Corps over here. D'Erlen's Corps is very weak. They're putting up a very tough fight around here, but the Prussian advantage is their weight of numbers. This is half of von Bülow's 4th Corps in the front there, and then Perch is following up closely behind, and again a long wave of reinforcements trickling down the road. So that key Prussian strength there is this weight of numbers. What they lack in morale and firepower, they just make up for in numbers. They can keep pushing. They've lost a lot of units already in 1 to 2 hours of fighting, but more just keep coming on, and they can just keep assaulting and assaulting and assaulting. Much inaction around here, nothing really happening. Over to the right, you can see Ray's Corps has formed up, and they're trying to push against those Hanoverians who are holding very nicely. The Allied heavy cavalry has decided to shift to the right instead of to the left. This, I mentioned, this square containment here is serving very well. And so the heavies are shifting to the right. There's also Prussian cavalry moving up on the left, so that enables that Allied heavy cavalry to shift to the right. And this is the end of the 6:40 p.m. turn, and after the morale check, the British are now on morale level 3. This means, as you can probably guess, that the Dutch have routed. Only narrowly. I mean, they're only just onto level 3, but they are there. And when that happens, all of the Dutch units rout. The Prussians lose morale. Hanoverians lose 18. The Brunswickers lose 18 diaspora modifiers. And the French, I think, gain 6 to all of their morale rolls. Even so, out here on the right, the Allies are holding off. The Hanoverians, they're in pretty good order. They're all mostly full strength, whereas Ray's corps is very weak, heavily reduced. Over to the left, Lebeau's 6th Corps is now, well, we thought they were done as a force, but it's this division here, Simmer's 19th Division, which is very much at, well, close to full strength. It was this other division here. This is Jeannin's 20th Division. They suffered all the losses. So Lebeau is, Mouton is sending his men back into the fight. They, again, with those full strength, mostly full strength division, they should be able to do some damage. Where those Dutch did leave the line around here, there is a bit of a gap, but Wellington's right behind the line. But again, some Hanoverians and some British in the area, and these are very much exhausted from Erlon's corps. 2 divisions here with a lot of losses there. And yeah, that containment line going well. So, despite the breaking of the Dutch and these negative morale modifiers, the fight continues, and there is still, well, we'll see what happens with the Prussians out on the left here, but the Allies still hold the field. I'll say that much for now. But again, time will tell what will happen with all these negative morale modifiers. All right, it's the end of the 7 p.m. turn, and well, the Allies are holding out despite the loss of those Dutch Belgians. Out on the left, the Prussians are really pushing quite hard. They have, as I mentioned last turn, they've tried to push through this little area, threaten the gaps between the flanks of the Guards divisions. You can see Purchase Corps. This is Purchase Corps pushing through around here. They're trying to push in this little area between the 2 halves of von Bülow's corps. You may recall, in an act of desperation, von Bülow split his corps up to try to push against the French on the right here. They have had some success out here. Von Bülow also launched some assaults. But in response, the French have brought the Guard-like cavalry into the area. You can see them around here. And they launched some early charges on von Bülow's Prussians in this area, which were very successful. And this really upset von Bülow's plans to launch some more assaults. Some French light cavalry, so the French have rushed to try to respond to Hirsch's assaults. Some French light cavalry has begun to move around. Imperial Guard shifting around to the right, I mentioned this, to contain the Prussians. By midway through the turn, they had the situation under control, and so this Guards division at the back decided that the crisis is over, and they would move back into the woods to threaten again. The Prussian 1st Corps has also arrived. You can see them in this area around here. They're now moving to the left. So with Perch pushing through in the centre here with his corps, von Bülow attacking the French with half of his corps here, that 1st Corps will shift to the left and perhaps move through the woods here, or threaten, really put a lot of pressure on this French division here. The heavies were activated. They also helped the light cavalry, the French light cavalry, with their attacks on the Prussians there. But they're just, again, this containment has really scared the French off, and they're shifting their attention now. They've suddenly shifted back towards the Prussians. The Brunswickers, far from retreating and pulling back, despite their massive morale modifier, have actually launched a series of assaults on the French in this area with some successes. And just a little bit to the right, the French under Foy, remember he pulled his line out to the left here, and they've quickly charged up onto the heights. And you can see what's happening here. Big open gaps, a few Allied skirmishes. And the French again winning the assaults. The French heavies on the right here, the cuirassiers is also activated, but instead of charging, they've shifted around to get into a better position to again exploit this open area here. It's just a bit of fire combat here, not much happening, and some more French heavies moving down. There were some cavalry skirmishes last turn. So it's a bit of a mixed situation. It's really hard to tell what's happening. The Allies certainly in trouble out here on the right. Ray's corps pushing quite hard. In the centre, the French hoping to just hold and not do much. Whereas out on the left, as with last turn, there are just assaults and counter-assaults, both sides hitting each other all throughout the line. You can see a lot of disorder, cavalry and infantry getting mixed in together. You can see a lot of squares. There's some very tense fighting going on here, and it all hangs in the balance. The Prussians have more and more troops coming on. The French don't have much in reserve. They are really just shifting their forces around, trying to hold off the Prussians. So it's the end of the 7 o'clock turn, 7:20 p.m. turn coming on. It is starting to get a little dark. How long can the French hold on? Indeed, can the Prussians and the Allies hold on? These negative morale modifiers are really hurting. The Brunswickers in particular, they can't do much. The negative 18 modifier. Okay, it's the end of the 7:20 p.m. turn, and while there are many developments across the field, the biggest one was right here, where the French effectively shut the door on Perch's advance into this area. First, the French sent a heap of light cavalry into the area to stop that advance, and then the Imperial Guard activated shortly thereafter, which enabled many of these units to move in and, as you can see, just block the Prussian advance. The light cavalry forced many of these Prussians in this area to rout, and the Imperial Guard helped finish a few more of those off. So that's put a stop to the Russian plans right here. The Guard also moved into the woods over to the left here, which is going to further deter the First Corps' advance into this area. So for now, Prussian advances are being directed into this area against the far right of that French Guard position, and to the left of de Erlon's Corps' position. The Prussians here, this is part of the 4th Corps under von Bülow and the 2nd Corps under Perch. They're working together, a bit chaotic, to attempt to drive through the French in this area now, and they're having some success again just through weight of numbers. You can see a lot of disordered Prussians in that area, but they've also along the way disordered and eliminated a number of French battalions in this area, and Prussian cavalry finally getting involved as well to assist with that drive. These French units here, again, this is de Erlon's Corps, which have been fighting along the ridge all day. They are very weak. They're down to sort of 3, 2, 2, 2 increments, but they do still have this these cuirassiers of the 4th Cavalry Corps in the area. They have suffered a few losses, but they are still in good health, and they are fresh, and they are able to put pressure on the Prussians as they try to advance to, well, what is the southwesterly direction. Now, further to the west, the Brunswickers have shifted their squares a little further to the right. But if we zoom out, you can see this is all that is left of that army of the Low Countries. There's a good firm square with the Brunswickers and I think the 5th Brigade here. The 6th Brigade over here are still in pretty good health, but there's not much else in this area. Looking further in, all we have left is a few remnants of shattered brigades and skirmishes. You can see remnants of the King's German Legion, some Jaegers, remnants of the 95th Foot Light Company there. But what happened over here was the French, well, you can see Foy and part of Mouton's 6th Corps beginning to drive through into this area. Foy pushing the skirmishers back. But over here, the French cuirassiers, I think the 3rd Cavalry Corps, began to push up here. And in fact, they routed some of the Allied heavy cavalry in this area through just force of numbers. The Hanoverians, who did have a strong line here just before, one of the battalions routed, 2 more were disordered, and they have a negative 18 morale modifier, and the French just need to give them a slight nudge, and they will fall over. And even so, they haven't activated the rest of their cavalry on the right here, so it's not looking good for the French, for the Allies out in this area. So the French have certainly defeated the army of the Low Countries. The negative morale modifier all throughout here is devastating for all those remaining Allied forces. They just cannot withstand these French assaults. It then, as always, comes down to the Prussians to see what they can do and if they can make something happen here. I've been saying that for a while now, but the pressure really is increasing as Wellington simply cannot hold out on the right anymore. So it's the end of the 7:20 p.m. turn. There's a 7:40 p.m. turn coming up, and then we'll do a morale check. All right, this is the end of the 7:40 p.m. turn. It's getting quite late, and you can see a lot of action around here, but no significant developments this turn. Prussian cavalry out in the far left did sortie and do some damage to that very destructive French Guard artillery out in the far left. In the centre here, you can see just next to the 4th Corps, the 1st Corps beginning to form up and getting ready to take part in those assaults on the Guards. And further to the right, this is where there are a big series of assaults, and the Prussians again doing a fair bit of damage, eliminating another Guards battalion, and despite their morale difficulties, they are causing some damage on the French, doing reasonably well as could be expected. Now, further to the east, the 5th Brigade has decided to pull out of their squares and shift right because things are getting pretty desperate out here on the right. I mean, it's already, the Army of the Low Countries has lost this situation here, but at the very least they're trying to stem the tide and slow down the French. So the 5th Brigade, you can see them here shifting to the right. And around here, this is Foy's men pushing through, forcing those skirmishers back. I think it was Hanoverians used to hold the line here. They've just been obliterated in the face of Jerome's men. And elsewhere, you can see the damage being done by that French heavy cavalry, which has come around to the side. So really it's just the French pushing forward, the Allied army not being able to sort of organise their troops and rally a decent defence. It's just skirmishes slowing down that eventual advance by the French in this area. Out in the far right here, there is nothing the Allies can do mass command confusion. There are units without leaders. Here you see British Guards battalion. I think they've only got one increment left. Some heavies who can still put up a fight. But then a scattering of, I think there are some Kings. These are King's German Legion battalions in here. Again, some more Hanoverians. Some British 4th Brigade troops, I think. But just the remnants of what was once the Army of the Low Countries. Still a strong centre here, which has been holding pretty well. The French here just do not have the strength to attack. But still, the French cuirassiers and guards light cavalry in this area are able to respond. You can see a lot of disordered Prussians. They are putting in a strong effort, and they are recovering reasonably well behind the lines. Here you can see some of those stragglers returning to the fight, but every time these guys try to return, there are more routed units. So the Prussians are, they're gradually pushing that French line back and causing some losses. I just don't know if it's enough to win the fight. As I said, end of the 7:40 p.m. turn. Now, in the morale check, both the French 1st and 2nd Corps are now on morale level 1. So it's a -3 morale modifier to the French. That's over on the right-hand side here. And a lot of their units are very low. But again, they're still retaining coordination, command, and control, and they can just much more effectively push forward compared to the Allies. So into the 7:40 p.m. turn, it is just on 8 p.m. at Waterloo. It's now the end of the 8 p.m. turn, and the fighting continues between the French Guard and the Prussians. Out in the far left, Prussian cavalry, for the first time in a while, was very active and launched a number of charges against the French Guard artillery, which was very effective. You can see out in the far left here, they've cleared out that area, disrupted much of the artillery, destroyed some of the other guns. In the centre, the 1st Corps of the Prussian army finally launched a series of charges, and again with some success there. You can see some disordered French units. They also, through artillery fire, eliminated another of the Guards battalions. Around to the right here, the Prussian artillery has eliminated some French light cavalry. And, in response, the French are forming a pretty solid line. You can see they've backed away from the Prussian guns in this area here. Around to the right, there were a number of assaults throughout here. A number of the French units routed, and Prussians routing in response. A lot of disordered Prussians behind the line. They have been, despite this negative morale modifier, the Prussians have been recovering from disorder pretty effectively. The French cuirassiers were in action, both the 13th and the 14th. They split up. Some of them have moved into this area, the 14th, whilst the 13th have shifted along to the right. And you can see this area here, they charged a number of those Brunswickers in square. Now, despite being in square and getting a positive morale modifier, the Brunswickers suffer a -18 morale modifier due to the morale level. And they just cannot stand up against the French cuirassiers who first disorder and then rout the Brunswickers in those charges. It happens very quickly. And the Brunswickers just can't stand their ground. The 5th Brigade, the British 5th Brigade, have pulled back from this line because, as I said earlier, things are getting pretty desperate. You can see Foy pushing through, just continually driving relentlessly those skirmishers back. And further to the right, the Nassau line has gone. The French heavy cavalry over here of the 3rd Corps are now advancing up onto the heights. The Allies did get lucky. They routed one of the heavies, but further to the east there, Jerome pushing through and more French. The heavy cavalry, the French heavy cavalry out here, have mainly been clearing out or harassing the Allied heavy cavalry in this area, leaving. Well, you can see they're kind of squeezing in the Allies. This is again what's left now of the army of the Low Countries in this area. This is French heavy cavalry around here. This is Ray's corps, Jerome and Bachelot, and French heavies pushing in from this way. So they're squeezing on both sides. Foy's already well advanced down here. What is left of the army of the Low Countries in this area is struggling to put up a fight. They're completely surrounded. And this is where the 5th Corps have shifted to try to stem this advance and put up a fight in this area. So the army of the Low Countries being battered on all sides, and they will not last much longer. It's, as I said, the end of the 8 o'clock turn, so they only have to last for another hour and a half, 2 hours. But despite the Prussian weight of numbers, they're just not able to inflict a decisive blow against the French. So these guards put up a big fight. They've launched actually a series of countercharges in this area around here, the Grenadiers, and light cavalry getting involved. There were some, as I said earlier, some Prussian successes in this area. It was actually, the Prussian hussars getting involved. You can see down here. And I'm sure they had some assault successes, but they may have recovered from their disorder already. And already you can see, again, light cavalry. This is the guard, light cavalry behind the lines. So Prussian morale and their willingness to drive is really weakening. The Prussians are almost just about all on the board. There's one more small group of reinforcements to arrive in the next turn, and again, just look at that, the routed Prussians behind the line. As I said, although they're losing a lot of morale, they're routing, disordering, they are recovering pretty well, and again, just this weight of numbers. So that is the end of the 8 o'clock turn. Here's a big overview so you can see what's happening. But as I said, that French heavy cavalry getting into the action and really just upsetting the Allied positions out on the right. This is the end of the 8:20 p.m. turn, and well, the Prussians continue to drive and assault against the French, but the French just continue to hold firm. The Prussians are getting a few very minor successes. This is the same story every turn. You can see one disordered French unit in the centre there. This is artillery and infantry together. There are a few casualties caused among the French up along the line, but the French line just doesn't budge. And in fact, what's happening now is D'Erlon is shifting his men over to the left. 2 of his divisions now are moving over to confront the Prussians, and they're allowed to do that because the Allied line is falling apart. You can see here, I think this is Marconi's division. They charged the Brunswickers up on the heights and routed and disordered a few of those. And just slightly to the east, Foy continues to drive against those skirmishes. You can see here the Duke of Wellington with a stack of what I'll call lost officers. These are officers who have lost their commands, basically, through losses and routing and disorder and so forth. There aren't many Allied units of that army of the Low Countries left. Again, these are French heavies out on the right. The Allies did get some light cavalry charges off that turn, which were quite successful, which just slowed down Bonaparte's assaults. You can see behind the lines there, they managed to rout a few of those French attackers, just slowing down their advance. These are King's German Legion defenders here, and they're doing pretty well. All things considered, they did hold off that French assault. But behind the line, these are all the routed units and the stragglers making their way back to the lines. A lot of routed and recovered Prussian units as well. The Prussians tend to rout very easily, but they tend to do very well on recovery, as you can see there. These are all the recovered units making their way back to the lines. So what's the big picture? Well, the Allied army of the Low Countries has effectively been destroyed. They really just can't put up a fight anymore. You can see the 5th Brigade here has formed a rough semicircle around where Wellington was on that highway north to Waterloo. The 6th Brigade continues to defend the crossroads there just north of Haye, Sainte. But there's not much left of that army, and so d'Erlon is now able to just shift his corps over to face the Prussians. And the Prussians continue to batter and batter and batter against the French. It's like hitting their heads against a brick wall. They're just not having much success. Not having substantial success, I should say. They've set up some guns here. This is a combination of 1st and 4th Corps artillery, which again are causing casualties among the French, but just not enough to break that line. So it's the end of the 8:20 p.m. turn, and there are 2 hours of daylight. Well, 2 hours of fighting left. It'll be dark in about an hour. Well, the Prussians will keep trying. They'll keep pushing, but I don't like the chances based on the past couple of hours of fighting. And I should also say all the Prussians are now on the field. They're all weaving their way along that road. There are no more Prussian reinforcements to arrive. So we've now got 1st Corps with some remnants of the 4th Corps out on the left. Purchase 2nd Corps driving through its centre here. And von Bülow's already shattered 4th Corps out on the right. You can see all those units in disorder and pretty much exhausted. There's not much more that 4th Corps can do out here on the right except try to recover, pull back, recover and assault again. Okay, here is the situation at the end of the 8:40 p.m. turn. As you can see here again, not much left of the army of the Low Countries. French cavalry pushing in from both sides. You can see the cuirassiers over on the left, and some French heavies around this area here, pushing in behind what was left of some of these remaining British guards. And Foy continuing to drive around here, pushing those skirmishers out, being joined on the left here by some of d'Erlon's corps. So now we have d'Erlon's corps and Ray's corps meeting around here, around what is left of Wellington's army. That's it. This tiny little square here is all that is left of the army of the Low Countries. There are some stragglers behind the lines, but they are dishevelled, leaderless, low on increments, and can't really do much to respond to what the French are bringing here. And again, still some fresh French heavies around here. And again, Jerome's men still in good condition, Bachelor's men still in good condition, Foy still pushing very hard, and Lebeau's men about to join the fight up here as well. This is 6th Corps. They do have a significant negative morale modifier, but they're at very good strength. And as I said earlier, d'Erlon is now able to bring his corps around to face against the Prussians. That's just been bumped. But the Prussians, again, they are banging their head against the wall. This doesn't look too different to the last image I showed of this line. In fact, the French line is a little bit stronger. You can see behind the lines this division being brought up just in case the Prussians break through. The Prussians launched a series of assaults all along the line. Some of them routed. They managed to inflict, I think there was one assault here, maybe here, that inflicts some losses on the French, but they're just not making any headway. They, in fact, haven't made any headway at all. They have hurt the French guard, certainly, but they just are not able to break through in any area whatsoever. In fact, at the end of the 840 turn morale check here, which I've just done, the Prussian 4th Corps moves to morale level 1, which means they now have a -8 morale modifier. At this point, it is just about dark. There is one turn left before dark, but I think the battle is all but over, and I'm tempted to call it here. I might just maybe run through one more turn, but the Prussians now have been fighting in this area for several hours, and they have not, well, I should lie, they did push the French back a little bit on the right here, but they haven't gained any considerable ground. The French Guard are just too strong, too stubborn. Morale is too strong as well. Had the Army of the Low Countries not fallen to morale level 3, and the Prussians not suffered that morale modifier, they may have stood a chance. Even then, these Prussian units are low on morale, whereas the French are just the French Guard, their elite morale. And over here, just again, part of d'Erlon's corps pushing through here, driving those skirmishers back, routing a lot of the British units. The armies of the Low Countries will last another turn or two, and then Wellington will have to leave the field. So it's all done over here. As I said, I might do one more turn and a wrap up, but the battle is just about all over. And I'll take some time to look back and reflect on what's happened. But this is the end of the 840 turn. It's just on the 9 o'clock turn, which will follow. Alright folks, it is the end of the 9 o'clock turn, and this is pretty much the end of the battle. The army of the Low Countries has been almost completely destroyed. The French are shifting now over to the left. You can see d'Erlon's men helping out the Imperial Guard. The Prussians just unable to make any, even minor, dent against that Imperial Guard defence. I'll focus on the land of the Low Countries first. They have just been battered by this low morale modifier, and there is not much they can do. It is at a point where French cavalry are now charging these Allied units in square quite willingly and eagerly because of the substantial negative morale modifier that is applied to those Allied units in defence. Even with the morale boost from being in square, they still suffer and typically break or suffer heavy losses from those assaults. So what's happened here is d'Erlon's men pushing from the left-hand side, or the eastern side of that highway, have now basically met up with Raye's men pushing from the right or the western side. And you can see in the centre here, Wellington now, with his pile of lost officers, is almost completely defenceless. These are French units under those disordered counters who have advanced after an assault. And you can see a number of French heavies in this area. The heavies from this left-hand side, who were over on this ridge, have come down, and they've met up with the heavies who pushed down through here, and they are in this area here. They've again been charging these British units in square. There is still, I think we can see, 3 fairly strong British battalions in square in that area. When I say fairly strong, some are down to 1 or 2 increments. They will probably not last one more turn. And I mean, the heavies won't, most of them charge this turn. They won't have an action next turn, but the infantry can finish off the job there. Wellington will be forced to leave the field. Out in the far right, Waterloo, his 6th Division, sorry, it wasn't Waterloo, it was Jerome's 6th Division, finally put flight to that very stubborn King's German Legion battalion that was standing around here. There is still, you can see some, I think they're light dragoons and some other Allied light cavalry scattered around this area. In fact, there's some Allied heavy cavalry further to the north, but they are, again, pretty weak, and there's nothing they can do at this stage. The French have, after 8 hours, destroyed, or 9 hours, 10 hours, destroyed the army of the Low Countries. And what this means now is that for the past hour or so, d'Erlon has been able to shift his corps out to the east to just back up the Prussian, the guard in this area. It's really not needed because the guard just have not been able to, with 3 corps working together, driving against the Imperial Guard, they just are not able to do any damage. Prussian artillery has, I guess, been whittling down some of those guards, chasseurs out in the left, but in the centre here, where 2nd Corps and 4th Corps have really been driving with everything, they have barely made a dent. A few incremental losses among the French. D'Erlon's Corps has suffered the most simply because of their lower morale, but the French Guard, sort of just on the left of that area, there's a Voltigeurs, Trailers. They just put up a great fight against those Prussian charges. You can see 4th Corps. They are disordered throughout. I mean, they did have one successful assault on the right there. That is a very rare occurrence. It is remarkable how unlucky they have been in their assaults. I mean, massive negative morale modifiers doesn't help. The fact that they start off with poor morale doesn't help. But even then, even when they roll to close, if one thing goes well, like their roll to close succeeds, they end up rolling poorly in assault. And they only just need one thing to go wrong for the assaults to fail. So you can see not much left of 4th Corps. This is that right-hand side of von Bülow's 4th Corps that I mentioned earlier. Just in that area there, that's all that's left. And 1, 2, 3, 4 of those stacks out of 6 are disordered. I mean, they're already weakened. They've lost a lot of increments throughout these units. But then you have the French defences. Light Guard cavalry, or the Guard light cavalry behind the lines. French heavy cavalry to the right of the lines. More of D'Erlon's Corps who can now shift over if needed. Behind the lines over here, they have some more Guard in reserve, some light cavalry behind the lines. French light cavalry out in the far left. 1st Corps couldn't organise themselves to get an assault going. They are too far away and at this point too demoralised to do anything about the situation. Even this, I mean, I guess this Prussian battery was doing some damage to the guards. They caused a few losses throughout the line, but again, not enough to force anything decisive. In order to sort of turn the tide here, there's a lot the Prussians could have done. I'll put that in a separate video. Things that might have happened to improve the Prussian and Allied chances in this battle. I'll do that all in a sort of summary video. For now, though, that's the end of the 9 o'clock turn, the end of the battle. It is now 9:20. It is dark. Now, there is potentially another hour or so to fight, but nothing is going to happen in that hour. So at this stage, the Prussians are going to slowly withdraw to the northeast along the roads from whence they came. There is not much to withdraw. I think Wellington, in the first instance, will head back north, and the French will retire for the night with the field under their control. Okay, the battle is now over and it's time for some reflection on what went right, what went wrong, what could have happened differently. Now, I'll start with the French and their initial plans. You may recall that the French initially wanted to focus on Hougoumont and drive Raye's entire corps at Hougoumont, with Bataille on the right, Foy in the centre, and Jerome on the left. Now, very early on, I realised how very tough this walled complex would be to break, and I started to focus more efforts on the flanks. Bringing that heavy and light cavalry around here was very effective. It just stopped the Allies from bringing up their forces. The Royal Horse Artillery lost the race to those heights. They did unlimber, but they could never get clear lines of fire. The Dutch Belgians were placed in front of them. Mismanagement of those separate forces meant that the Royal Horse Artillery never got effective firing targets against the French, which enabled the French cavalry out here to pick and choose their targets and seize the initiative and hold that initiative out here on that left flank for several hours. With Jerome in close support, they slowly cleared, you can see that artillery is still there, slowly cleared the British from around that left flank. And eventually, with again cavalry support, they managed to push up onto that clear ground. At the same time, Bachelot had much success. Lebeau supported him on the right. Lebeau's 6th Corps supported on the right. And together they managed to squeeze the British very slowly out of the orchards. This was not the quick seizure of Hougoumont as I had originally hoped and planned as the French. It was a slow, steady grind, but nonetheless successful. In fact, by the time that walled complex of buildings finally fell, there were no other Allied units in this area. I think both Bachelot and Jerome had moved up to this high ground. It was just Foy left to fire away at those defenders in the buildings. And the buildings themselves were no longer slowing up or holding up the French. It was no longer the threat that it once was. Now you may recall Lebeau's 6th Corps had tried to move up into this open ground to support on their left or right. They suffered very heavily from an Allied heavy cavalry charge, a series of heavy cavalry charges in the centre, which very quickly brought Lebeau's 6th Corps up to morale level 3 and made it difficult for them to play any significant role in the battle from there on. D'Erlon was slow to start, but he gradually moved up his forces in this area here. This is difficult terrain to navigate, a lot of steep slopes, difficult for the artillery and the cavalry to move through, but eventually they got going and they, through I think weight of numbers and superior morale, pushed the Dutch Belgians and the Hanoverians, Nassauers off those ridges. And certainly captured much of that high ground, but it wasn't until they got the cavalry involved, the heavy cavalry up here on the right of the 13th and 14th, and the Guard light cavalry in particular were very effective at threatening and disrupting the Allied forces out here east of the highway. Credit to the British 5th and 6th Brigade of the Reserve Corps in the centre, some of them still holding their ground after, an entire day of fighting. You can see those men in square there. They have suffered very few casualties, I think a couple of increments lost, but they've only started to suffer very recently, and they have held off the French in this area of D'Erlon's Corps, left side of D'Erlon's Corps. The French captured La Haye Sainte, but they couldn't really press much further to the north because of those British defenders. So all told, the French plan out here on the left went pretty well. They, modified their assault on Hougoumont to focus on the flanks, leaving the buildings largely alone without wasting too much of their effort, pushing the British back, forcing Wellington to continually shift between the left and the right and not being able to coordinate his forces very effectively. Now you may recall earlier the Guard, we dedicated the Guard to holding in reserve and then dealing with the Prussians when they began to arrive. And the Guard, instead of holding back, really pushed into an aggressive defensive position through these woods here, just southwest of the Bois de Paris. There are some good heights here, the woods. They occupied a few of those urban areas and held their ground very strongly throughout several hours of fighting. All they had to do here was just hold and defend. They launched a few counter assaults here and there, but they never really had any long-term plans to advance against the Prussians. They were just holding this area whilst Haye, Lebeau, Mouton and D'Erlon and the cavalry did all the work out here against the Allied army in the centre. And ultimately it's a plan that succeeded. Many times I thought the Guard would not be able to hold out against these Prussians. And many times I was proven wrong. Alright, let's flip it around and see things from the Allied perspective. Perhaps the Allies should have sent more troops into Hougoumont. You may recall very early on, they pushed forward with the British Guards and supporting units on their flanks. I thought that was a bit too much, but maybe it wasn't enough. Maybe they should have sent more, particularly the likes of the Dutch Belgians and Hanoverians, perhaps some closer support, perhaps instead of dedicating so many forces out here on their right, just facing off against the French cavalry and artillery. They should have focused more around this area. When they began to threaten the 6th Corps, that was very successful, and for a time it looked like they may even push around. You may recall there was some light cavalry and artillery out here, Allied forces threatening the 6th Corps and Waterloo, the sort of eastern flank of Raye's men. That was good for a time, until, I guess, the French began to push out here in the east. Because, and the situation throughout the battle is because the French had the initiative, because they are choosing when and where to assault, I think that was a big advantage to them. The Allies are responding and were responding throughout the day to what the French were doing. In those brief moments when the Allies did seize the initiative and did launch those counter-assaults, they tended to do very well, like along here and a few counter-assaults along here. Perhaps they should have done more of that, more counterattacks, counter-assaults throughout the day. They just ultimately suffered too many casualties. The British Guards in particular perhaps should not have pushed so far forward alone. There's a lot to reflect on what happened in and around this area. The Guards in particular just suffering too many casualties, too many British casualties, which pushed their morale level up to numbers they couldn't recover from. And despite their superior morale, these are elite units. Many of them were eliminated. There were a few unlucky routs of those Guards units, and it's just hard to recover from there. And I guess another key factor is French cavalry superiority and command superiority. The French can just activate their cavalry over and over again and continue to drive and push, whereas the Allies just cannot do that. They struggle for, I guess, activation, coordination, and control. Out here, just the French, again, initiative, picking and choosing their targets, shifting their focus, and the Allies unable to respond to that, just being whittled down increment by increment. And once, you may recall, when that French heavy cavalry shifted around here with the Guards' light cavalry, in combination with Raye's advance, it was too much for the Allies to be able to respond to. At the same time that this was happening, the Allied heavy cavalry was over here, and perhaps had they not pushed through there, because great, they brought the 6th Corps up to morale level 3, that was great, but at the same time they lost the ridge. So maybe the Allied heavy cavalry should have come across here to the left instead to counter that French assault, because it was ultimately devastating for the French to be behind the Allied lines along this ridge. Now, a lot has been said about the Prussian advance and the decisions made by the Prussians. So, when the Prussians began to arrive, the Guards had already set up a good position here. You may recall they had a very strong Guards artillery battery out in this open area. They set sort of their terminuses around this area, and their plan was to drive right into the the flank of Haye's corps as they were rolling up, or attempting to roll up the Allied line. So part of 4th Corps is still along here, and they set up along here. Haye Corps, the other half was sent to drive immediately into Haye's men. And that was the main priority. And they did have some initial success. They haven't gained much, perhaps about half a kilometre of open ground around here. And they did, in parts, force that French heavy cavalry back. All of that was predicated on the idea of saving the Army of the Low Countries, keeping the French away from the flanks of the Army of the Low Countries, and ideally linking the Prussians with the Army of the Low Countries and driving the French back together. That was why the Prussians focused so much effort around this area. You can see this is very difficult terrain. They did launch a few assaults here. I'll touch on that in a moment. When Purchas's 2nd Corps arrived, they 4th Corps was largely focused in this area. They were at the time driving through here, and so 2nd Corps tried to occupy the middle ground between the two halves of 4th Corps to assist in that drive, pushing this way. They had at the time opened up a bit of a gap, and they thought they could exploit that. They had some minor success. Again, you can see they've pushed the French Guard back a little bit. They forced de Erlon to bring 2 of his divisions out here to help. But they just could not force a decisive either breakthrough or destruction of any of those Guards' divisions or of de Erlon's divisions. So that accounts for the decision of the Prussians to focus in this area, trying at the time to save the Army of the Low Countries, to hurt de Erlon's corps, to hurt the edges of the Guards. And that was why they focused so much effort around here. Perhaps, so alternatives, perhaps they should have skirted all the way around here and pushed through to Plassanois in the rear, which is all the way down here. Why didn't they do so? I think just immediate decisions at the time. The fact that the Guards had pushed so far up, the fact that they had this, for a start, light cavalry very active out here, a strong artillery battery here. It feels like, having watched these Prussians march all the way, by the time they finally arrived near the fighting, there was a desire to get them straight into the action and charge straight away. Even at sort of 5, 6, 7 p.m, it feels like it's getting late, and it felt like a rush for the Prussians to hit hard before the Army of the Low Countries suffered more losses. And that sort of sense of urgency is another reason why Purchas's 2nd Corps was sent in here, and 4th Corps reinforcements rushed straight in. And I dilly-dallied a lot with 1st Corps. Originally I was going to send them here. They then began to shift out, and I had planned to attack on the left flank, having destroyed that, only recently destroyed that Guard artillery. In the end, the 1st Corps was almost completely wasted, marching hither and there in the last hour or two of the battle. So perhaps poor Prussian planning, short-sightedness perhaps, a sense of being rushed, but also, I guess, the genuine belief that they could hurt. I mean, I believed at the time that the 4th Corps and the 2nd Corps had sufficient numbers and strength to push the French back. I thought that's what was going to happen. I didn't count on such poor assaulting and negative morale modifiers, failures to close, poor assault rolls, and just very incredibly stubborn Guards defence. So yeah, that accounts for the Prussian decision to drive. I also, because of, as soon as I started to realise Prussian failures in assaulting, I wanted to put them in a position to follow up through a series of assaults. So assaulting. You can see here these waves of, these are currently second corps men, being prepared to follow in after each other. This is something I've been trying to do for several hours. Is to launch an assault, follow up with a second wave, follow up with a third wave. By the time that third wave is hitting, there may even be a fourth or a fifth wave, or these men have recovered and they're ready to go again. It's causing losses among the guards, but it has just not been significant enough to force a breakthrough. So, I guess disappointed with the poor, rolling of the Prussians, short-sightedness again, as I've said. What I thought was a good idea to hit this area of the French line turned out to be a failure. But also immensely impressed with the toughness of the guards. Their ability to, just mainly morale factors, having such a strong ability to stand and put up with whatever the Prussians throw at them. Okay, so there you have it. The French plan to assault, and at the time when the French were assaulting up here and they're causing so much damage to the Allies, my thinking at the time was, you seize the initiative, you choose your targets for assault, and that is why the French are doing so well. When the Prussians tried to do the same thing, and I was thinking, the French have assaulted so well, surely the Prussians will be able to force these guards back. It didn't work out the same. So on the right-hand side, French assaults were splendid. On the left-hand side, Prussian assaults were the complete opposite. It certainly was a tale of sort of two halves of this battle.